Capgras delusion is one of the most haunting mental afflictions a person can endure. A psychological break so jarring that the very faces meant to bring comfort suddenly become the source of suspicion and terror. At the heart of this nightmare lies a chilling belief that someone close to you, your partner, your child, your parent, has been replaced by a perfect imposter. They look the same. They speak the same. But something invisible and inexplicable, feels off. To the sufferer, it's not a simple doubt. It is an unshakable conviction that the person before them is no longer real. Capgras delusion. This delusion doesn't arise from nowhere. It often follows brain injury, neurodegenerative disorders, or psychotic episodes. The visual recognition systems remain intact. Patients can see their loved ones clearly, but the emotional link, the gut feeling of familiarity and safety, is severed. The face registers logically, but it fails to ignite the emotional spark that says, "I know you." And when the brain senses such a terrifying disconnect, it scrambles to explain it. The explanation it lands on is horrifying. This person must be an imposter. The real one is gone. Replaced. Imagine waking up one day and looking into your spouse's eyes, only to feel nothing, no warmth, no recognition. Their smile feels mechanical. Their presence feels staged. Every laugh, every word seems rehearsed. You begin to believe they're mimicking someone they've studied, learning your loved one's gestures, their quirks, their private language, just to deceive you. The fear becomes unbearable. Trust collapses. Home becomes a prison of familiar strangers. For the families of those suffering from Capgras, the pain is just as acute. One moment you are a cherished child or partner. The next, you're a pretender accused of unspeakable deceit. Reassurance is useless. Logic doesn't reach the part of the brain that's been wounded. You can say, "It's me," 100 times, but it echoes back unheard. Capgras delusion is not just a loss of trust. It is the theft of love through a glitch in the mind. It turns intimacy into suspicion and familiarity into alienation. In its grip, even the most sacred relationships disintegrate into a terrifying theater of doubt, and no one, neither the sufferer nor the accused, escapes unscarred. Cotard's delusion. Cotard's delusion is perhaps one of the most bone-chilling mental states ever documented. A psychological void so deep that the very sense of being alive vanishes. At the core of this rare and terrifying disorder lies a singular, horrifying belief. You are dead. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally. You are a walking corpse, an empty vessel, devoid of soul, sensation, or reality. The world continues to move around you, but you're convinced you no longer exist. You may breathe, but you're certain your organs have decayed. You may speak, but you believe you're echoing from beyond the grave. This delusion, often rooted in severe depression, psychosis, or neurological damage, hijacks the most basic assumption we hold: that we are here, alive, experiencing the world. For someone with Cotard's, that foundational truth collapses. They feel hollowed out, disconnected from their body, severed from reality. Time loses meaning. Hunger fades. Hygiene is abandoned. Why eat if you're already dead? Why sleep if you're no longer bound by the rules of the living? Some sufferers insist their blood has stopped flowing. Others claim their heart no longer beats. They may go to morgues seeking confirmation or demand to be buried. There are documented cases of patients who stop speaking altogether, convinced that ghosts don't talk. One woman with Cotard's refused food for weeks because she believed her stomach had rotted away. She didn't think she was dying. She believed she had already died. What makes Cotard's delusion uniquely cruel is that it strips away the final thread of hope. In most mental illnesses, even in despair, there's some part of the mind that fights for life. But Cotard's doesn't just bring darkness. It tells you that light never existed, that your suffering is eternal because you're stuck in a post-life limbo with no way back. It's the psychological equivalent of staring into an abyss and seeing your own absence reflected back. Family and friends become spectral onlookers. Their love, their concern, it feels misplaced because in your mind, you are no longer someone who can be loved. Cotard's delusion is not a fear of death. It is the belief that death has already happened, and you're the only one who noticed. Reduplicative paramnesia. Reduplicative paramnesia is a deeply disorienting and surreal mental distortion where a person becomes utterly convinced that a place, usually one of personal significance, exists in more than one location at the same time. To the sufferer, this is not confusion. It is not a faulty memory or a fading dream. It is a solid, unshakable belief that a hospital, a house, a city, or even an entire country has been replicated somewhere else in the world, identical in every detail, yet impossibly and inexplicably duplicated. This delusion often follows brain trauma, strokes, or neurodegenerative diseases, particularly affecting areas responsible for memory and spatial recognition. But its emotional weight far exceeds the clinical facts. Imagine waking up in a hospital you've known your entire life, but feeling a cold certainty that this isn't the real one. It looks the same. The hallways twist in familiar ways. The doctors smile like they used to. But in your bones, you know this is a copy, a fake, a staged version designed to deceive you or contain you. And even when you're driven home, even when you walk through your own front door, the eerie feeling persists. This is a replica of home, not the home you remember. What makes reduplicative paramnesia particularly disturbing is how deeply it attacks your sense of reality and trust. You begin to question everything. If this hospital is a duplicate, what else has been replicated? Is your neighborhood real? Your country? The people around you? It becomes a spiral of uncertainty, where space fractures and familiarity becomes a cruel illusion. For caregivers and loved ones, the challenge is heartbreaking. No amount of proof, logic, or reassurance breaks the illusion. You could show photos, maps, even historical documents, yet the delusion persists, like a glitch in the fabric of the mind that rewrites the world to fit its new rules. There is something profoundly isolating about believing the world has been split in two, and that everyone else is blind to it. It's a quiet psychological horror, one that doesn't scream, but whispers relentlessly. Reduplicative paramnesia doesn't just change how you see a place. It changes your relationship with reality itself, leaving you trapped in a mirrored version of life where nothing feels real and nowhere feels safe. Fregoli delusion. Fregoli delusion is a deeply paranoid and unsettling mental condition in which the sufferer becomes convinced that different people, strangers, friends, even public figures, are actually the same person in disguise. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally. One relentless, shape-shifting individual who wears different faces, plays different roles, and follows them from place to place with malicious intent. It is a psychological trap of suspicion and dread, where identity loses all meaning and no face can be trusted. At the heart of this delusion is a terrifying fusion of hyper-recognition and paranoia. The brain wrongly assigns a familiar identity to multiple unfamiliar people, creating a nightmarish narrative in which one singular persecutory presence stalks the sufferer across time and space. A nurse becomes the neighbor, a taxi driver becomes the cousin, a newscaster becomes the same man who smiled at you in the grocery store. There is no escape, because everywhere you go, the same person is already waiting, just dressed differently. The condition is often rooted in brain injuries, schizophrenia, or other psychotic disorders, particularly affecting the areas responsible for facial recognition and emotional memory. But the cold science cannot convey the psychological horror of believing that someone has infiltrated your life completely, become everyone, everywhere, all at once. Every face turns into a mask. Every encounter becomes a trap. Imagine the fear of walking through a crowded street and being sure that every face that turns your way hides the same enemy underneath. Imagine doubting the people you love, not because they've changed, but because you believe they've never been themselves to begin with. They're just actors, costumes, variations of the same relentless entity obsessed with manipulating or harming you. For those around the sufferer, it's both painful and surreal. Conversations become interrogations. Affection becomes evidence. Every interaction feels staged in the eyes of the deluded mind, feeding the belief that someone is playing an elaborate game of deception. Fregally delusion is not just the loss of trust in others. It is the collapse of the idea that people can be distinct, autonomous, or innocent. It turns the world into a one-man theater of torment, where every role is played by the same unseen antagonist, and no one, not even strangers, can be trusted to be real. Alice in Wonderland Syndrome. Alice in Wonderland Syndrome is a disorienting and dreamlike mental condition where your perception of yourself and the world around you breaks free from reality's grip. Named after the famous literary tale, this syndrome plunges you into a psychological wonderland, but not a magical one. Instead, it's surreal, disturbing, and often terrifying. You may look down at your hands and feel like they are ballooning to the size of pillows. You might walk down a hallway that seems to stretch into infinity, or watch a loved one's face warp and twist before your eyes like a mirage. It is not a hallucination. It is your mind misinterpreting reality, your body, your surroundings, time, even your sense of scale. You feel like you are shrinking or growing, floating or collapsing. Objects may appear closer than they are, or impossibly far. Time can speed up like a fast-forwarded tape, or slow down until each second drips like honey. The boundaries between what you know to be true and what you feel start to melt, leaving you lost in a world that no longer obeys the rules. This syndrome is often linked to migraines, epilepsy, brain infections, or intense psychological trauma. It can strike suddenly, sometimes in childhood, sometimes in adulthood, and it leaves you questioning the very reliability of your senses. Imagine walking through your home and feeling like the walls are bending inward, like you're in a shrinking box. Or imagine trying to reach for your phone, only to feel like your arm stretches a mile away, detached from your body's command. For some, the episodes are brief and intermittent, mere moments of cognitive chaos. For others, they are long, lingering ordeals that make reality feel elastic and unstable. During an episode, fear often takes hold. You know the world shouldn't look or feel this way, but you can't make it stop. You can't trust your eyes, your hands, your ears. You're trapped in a distorted reflection of the world you thought you knew, like a lucid nightmare without a clear exit. Alice in Wonderland Syndrome doesn't just alter perception. It shakes your grip on existence itself, pulling you into a space where nothing can be believed, and everything you once trusted, your senses, your body, your mind, turns into a maze with no center. Apotemnophilia. Apotemnophilia is one of the most haunting and misunderstood psychological conditions, where an individual experiences an overwhelming, obsessive desire to amputate a healthy, functional limb. It is not a cry for attention. It is not about pain or punishment. It is a deep, persistent belief that one or more limbs do not belong, that they are alien, intrusive, or simply not meant to be there. The longing is not driven by dysfunction of the body, but by a profound and unshakable discord between the body and the self. Those who suffer from apotemnophilia, now more formally understood under the umbrella of body integrity identity disorder, BIID, often describe a lifelong, almost spiritual sense that their body is incomplete unless a part of it is removed. The thought is not fleeting. It is constant, intense, and emotionally tormenting. They may spend years fantasizing about amputation, researching surgical techniques, or simulating life without the limb, binding it, hiding it, or using wheelchairs or crutches to mirror what they believe is their true physical identity. The psychological pain is staggering. There is shame, confusion, and fear of being labeled as insane. Many sufferers know, logically, that their desire seems irrational, but the emotional and existential pull is stronger than logic. They are trapped in a body that feels wrong, disconnected, foreign. Some liken it to gender dysphoria, except instead of a mismatch of gender identity, it's a mismatch of bodily completeness. They don't hate their limb. They simply cannot accept it as part of who they are. In extreme cases, the desperation becomes unbearable. There are tragic stories of individuals injuring themselves deliberately, freezing, crushing, or infecting the limb, just to force doctors into removing it. These acts are not done with malice or self-destruction, but with a twisted hope of finally feeling whole. When denied, many fall into deep depression, unable to focus on work, relationships, or even survival. To outsiders, apotemnophilia seems incomprehensible. But to those inside it, the limb feels like a lie the body tells, a flaw in the architecture of the self. And until that part is gone, peace feels unattainable. It is a silent, hidden nightmare, one that lives beneath the skin, waiting for the body to match the mind. Clérambault's syndrome. Clérambault's syndrome, also known as erotomania, is a deeply consuming and delusional belief that someone, usually a person of high status, fame, or power, is secretly in love with you. This is not a mere fantasy or an obsessive crush. It is a full-fledged conviction that love is being exchanged in hidden, coded ways, despite no relationship, no communication, and often not even a single interaction. The person with this syndrome becomes convinced that glances from a television screen, lines in a song, or brief sightings in public are personal messages of affection, meant only for them. The torment begins quietly. A glance from a stranger might linger in memory longer than it should. A smile on a screen seems just a little too knowing. The mind, hungry for connection, begins weaving a narrative. They know me. They love me. They're just unable to say it out loud. From there, it grows into obsession, then delusion. Everything becomes a sign. A tweet becomes a love letter. A lyric becomes proof. Silence becomes part of the game, a barrier the other person is trying to break. What makes Clérambault's syndrome so devastating is its foundation in loneliness and unmet emotional needs. It often strikes people isolated from close relationships, people who feel unseen, forgotten, or invisible. In their minds, the imagined lover fills that void. The delusion gives life meaning, purpose, and excitement. But as it deepens, it steals those very things away. Eventually, boundaries collapse. The sufferer might begin sending letters, showing up at public events, or even attempting to meet their supposed lover face to face. When met with rejection or legal action, they don't interpret it as disinterest. They see it as a test of devotion, a sign the other person is being silenced by external forces. Reality, at that point, becomes malleable, rewritten by longing and denial. For the person being idealized, the situation becomes terrifying. What seems like adoration from a distance quickly turns to stalking, harassment, or worse. And for the sufferer, the heartbreak never ends, because the love they believe in feels eternal, even if it never existed. Clérambault's syndrome isn't about love. It's about a mind that creates affection out of absence and refuses to let it go. Diogenes syndrome. Diogenes syndrome is a harrowing descent into self-neglect so profound that it becomes a living grave, an invisible prison built from isolation, filth, and silent suffering. It's not just about hoarding or mess. It is the total collapse of self-care, social connection, and dignity. Those who suffer from Diogenes syndrome often live in unimaginable squalor, surrounded by decaying food, broken objects, waste, and the ever-growing weight of things long since abandoned by the rest of the world. But more devastating than the physical wreckage is the emotional vacuum it conceals. The person is not just untidy. They stop bathing. They stop speaking to others. They refuse help, shut out family, and withdraw into themselves like a vanishing ghost. There is no shame left, only a numb, immovable detachment from what others consider reality. The house becomes a tomb of possessions, a monument to memory, fear, and paralysis. And inside it sits a person who once had a life, perhaps even love, but who now exists as if already forgotten. This syndrome can strike anyone, often the elderly, especially after the loss of a loved one or a traumatic rupture. But it's not exclusive to age. Something inside breaks, and instead of seeking comfort, the person turns inward, as if hiding from a world that no longer makes sense. Their surroundings decay in step with their spirit. Yet they don't see it as decay. To them, everything is fine. Offers of help are met with hostility or icy silence. Doctors, social workers, even family members are kept at arm's length. Not out of pride, but out of a deep, painful conviction that nothing matters anymore. The name comes from the ancient Greek philosopher Diogenes, who rejected materialism and social conventions, living in a barrel. But this syndrome is no philosophy. It's despair without expression. It's grief fossilized into behavior. It's a quiet implosion of the self, turning human beings into shadows among ruins. There is something tragically poetic about Diogenes' syndrome. It whispers that behind every boarded window and every cluttered room, there may be someone not crazy, not dangerous, but deeply hurt, deeply alone, and slowly vanishing beneath the weight of what they can no longer carry or clean away. Kluver-Bucy syndrome. Kluver-Bucy syndrome is a rare but profoundly disturbing neurological condition that strips a person of the emotional filters, fears, and inhibitions that normally guide human behavior. It turns the mind into a raw, unguarded state where primal impulses take control. At its core, this syndrome is marked by a terrifying triad: compulsive eating of anything in sight, hypersexuality with no sense of boundaries, and an eerie, childlike docility, even in the face of danger. The syndrome typically follows damage to the temporal lobes, particularly the amygdala, which is central to emotion regulation, threat detection, and behavioral restraint. But what emerges after that damage is not just confusion or forgetfulness. It is a transformation of identity. The sufferer becomes a shadow of their former self, driven by instincts they can no longer control or even understand. Imagine someone who cannot stop putting objects in their mouth. Not food, just anything. Shoes, pebbles, paper, broken glass. The compulsion is automatic, relentless, and devoid of logic. Hunger has nothing to do with it. It's as though the mind forgets what things are and decides the only way to interact with the world is through taste and touch. Then comes the hypersexuality, a flood of inappropriate urges with no regard for context or consequence. A person with Kluver-Bucy syndrome might attempt sexual contact with strangers, inanimate objects, even animals. They might disrobe in public, masturbate compulsively, or make advances without any awareness of social norms. It is not just shocking, it is heartbreaking, because the person behind the behavior is gone, stripped of self-awareness, shame, or understanding. The final blow is the unnatural calm, the terrifying absence of fear. Confronted with threats, screaming voices, violent gestures, dangerous situations, they show no panic, no defensive response. They may walk into fire or pet a snarling dog without hesitation. The danger isn't processed. It's not even felt. Kluver-Bucy syndrome doesn't just change behavior. It hollows out the human layers of a person, leaving behind a shell governed by instincts without comprehension. It turns the familiar face of a loved one into something alien. A person who smiles, touches, and reaches out, but seems impossibly distant from the self they used to be. Walking corpse syndrome. Walking corpse syndrome, more clinically known as Cotard's delusion in its most severe form, is a psychological abyss where the sufferer becomes convinced that they are no longer alive. But unlike simple depression or identity loss, this syndrome drags the mind into a deeper, more harrowing delusion, that the body still moves, but the self is gone. You breathe, but believe your lungs are filled with rot. You speak, but feel no soul behind the words. The eyes you see in the mirror are glassy and unfamiliar, like they belong to something that died long ago. It begins with a profound detachment, first from the world, then from the body, and finally from existence itself. The feeling is not sadness, it is emptiness. Total, terrifying emptiness. The kind that makes the air feel hollow and the sky too far away to matter. People suffering from walking corpse syndrome may stop eating, convinced their stomach has decomposed. They may withdraw from every relationship, believing they no longer deserve love or that their presence contaminates the living. Some even seek out cemeteries, hoping to find a place to lie down and belong. The syndrome hijacks the brain's ability to connect emotional recognition with sensory experience. You might see your hands moving, but they feel robotic. You might hear your own voice, but it sounds like an echo from a tomb. Touch becomes distant. Taste disappears. The senses don't shut down. They just stop meaning anything. There are documented cases of sufferers demanding to be buried, insisting they're already dead. Others walk through cities in a daze, untouched by rain, hunger, or traffic, as though fate no longer applies to them. Medical tests, pleading families, mirrors, and memories are powerless to change their minds. The mind, once the seat of identity and meaning, becomes a stage for a nihilistic hallucination, that all has ended, even though the body keeps moving. This is not just a loss of hope, it is a rejection of being. Walking corpse syndrome strips away every instinct that binds us to life, pleasure, fear, love, meaning, and replaces it with silence. You become the echo of a person, haunting your own skin, waiting for the world to realize you've already left. Morbid jealousy, Othello syndrome. Morbid jealousy, also known as Othello syndrome, is an obsessive and delusional fixation on the idea that one's partner is being unfaithful, despite a total lack of evidence. This isn't normal jealousy. This is a relentless, consuming paranoia that hijacks the mind and corrodes every moment of intimacy, transforming love into a weapon and trust into ash. The sufferer becomes convinced, often with violent certainty, that betrayal is happening in secret, and that every word, every glance, every silence is a clue. It begins subtly. A delayed reply, a missed call, a quiet laugh exchanged with someone else. But in the mind of someone with Othello syndrome, these everyday moments become evidence of a grand deception. The logic is circular and inescapable. If proof of the affair cannot be found, it is only because the partner is hiding it too well. Innocence is not reassuring, it is suspicious. Denials are not comforting, they are lies. Soon, the obsession takes over. Phones are checked, social media scoured, GPS monitored. Every interaction is dissected. Every conversation is mined for double meanings. The sufferer becomes a detective and a judge, building a case against their lover with imaginary crimes. And once the delusion takes hold, it cannot be reasoned with. Love becomes surveillance. Intimacy becomes interrogation. Passion curdles into rage. For the accused partner, it's psychological suffocation. Their every move is watched. Their freedom is questioned. They are forced to prove a loyalty that was never broken. They often begin to second-guess themselves, living in fear that a smile or a text will trigger another spiral. Relationships under the shadow of Othello syndrome don't just suffer, they shatter. Sometimes, the jealousy escalates into violence. History is filled with tragic stories of lovers hurt or even killed by those convinced of their infidelity. The name comes from Shakespeare's Othello, who was manipulated into murdering the woman he loved, believing she had betrayed him. But in Othello syndrome, there is no Iago, no outside manipulator. The mind turns against itself, weaving a betrayal from thin air, and turning the person you love most into the villain of a story that never existed. Thought broadcasting. Thought broadcasting is a deeply invasive and terrifying delusion in which a person becomes utterly convinced that their innermost thoughts are no longer private, that they are being transmitted, exposed, and heard by others without speaking a word. The mind, once a sacred, sealed chamber, is suddenly a radio tower blaring secrets, doubts, and fears into the ears of strangers, family members, and passers-by. Nothing feels safe anymore. Every internal whisper feels like a public confession. This delusion is often linked to schizophrenia, psychosis, or severe trauma, and it distorts the most fundamental boundary a human being has: the boundary between thought and reality. For the person experiencing it, the belief is not abstract, it is immediate and raw. They walk into a room and feel eyes turning, conversations halting, people smirking or shifting away. Not because of what they say, but because of what they believe has already leaked out of their mind. Imagine having a fleeting, shameful thought, and believing the person next to you just heard it. Imagine trying to suppress an angry impulse, only to be certain your coworker is now glaring because they heard it pass through your mind. Every reaction becomes a reflection. Every glance becomes an accusation. Paranoia intensifies, because how do you hide from your own thoughts? How do you shut down the voice that's no longer locked inside? Those suffering from thought broadcasting may begin to whisper to themselves to block the signal. Others wear headphones or tinfoil, desperate to jam the imaginary frequency. Some isolate completely, fearing their thoughts are infecting others or being used against them. Relationships crumble, not from disinterest, but from fear. Fear that loved ones are hearing their confusion, guilt, or unfiltered rage and judging them silently. The mind becomes a trap. You can't trust your thoughts, and you can't hide them. It's not just about being watched. It's about being exposed, mentally naked in a world that you believe is always listening. Even silence becomes unbearable, because in the quiet, your thoughts feel louder. Thought broadcasting is not about arrogance or delusions of grandeur. It's a psychological crucifixion, being nailed to your own consciousness, every inner murmur turned against you, echoing endlessly in what used to be the safety of your mind. Lycanthropy, delusion. Lycanthropy. Delusion is one of the most primal and terrifying distortions of human identity, a rare and deeply unsettling condition where a person becomes utterly convinced that they have transformed or are in the process of transforming into an animal. Not figuratively, not metaphorically, but physically, viscerally, literally. To the sufferer, the claws are real, the fur is growing, the eyes in the mirror are no longer human. This delusion often manifests alongside psychotic disorders or neurological damage, but its roots dig into something far older, the ancient fear and awe of the animal within. The stories of werewolves, beasts, and shapeshifters that have haunted myth and folklore for centuries come alive, not in fantasy, but in the twisted wiring of the human brain. And once the transformation is believed, it becomes all-consuming. Those afflicted may growl, walk on all fours, avoid mirrors, or flee from others out of fear of what they might do. They may describe sensations of bones shifting, teeth lengthening, or bloodlust rising. For them, this is not a role play or hallucination. This is identity collapse. They no longer see themselves as human. The psychological horror lies not just in the belief that they've changed, but in the terror of what they might become. Some fear they will hurt others. Some feel cursed. Others embrace it, believing they've evolved or become chosen for something darker. This delusion shatters the boundary between civilization and the wild, between logic and instinct, until the person is trapped in a mental wilderness, surrounded by imagined claws and teeth they cannot escape. Family and doctors often struggle to intervene because the sufferer may become aggressive, secretive, or unreachable. They may hide from light, avoid mirrors, or even attempt self-mutilation to release the animal they believe is inside. In some cases, the delusion is linked with deep-rooted trauma or identity disorders, an internal fragmentation so severe that the mind must escape itself by becoming something else entirely. Lycanthropy. Delusion isn't about fantasy. It is about losing the most fundamental understanding of self. It is the mind howling into the night, no longer able to recognize the body it's trapped in, and terrified of the beast it believes it has become. Ekbom's syndrome. Ekbom syndrome, also known as delusional parasitosis, is a relentless psychological torment where the sufferer becomes absolutely convinced that their body is infested with parasites, tiny, crawling creatures burrowing under their skin, breeding, spreading, consuming them from within. There are no bugs, no mites, no eggs, but the conviction is total, and the horror is unending. It begins with a sensation, an itch, a tingle, a subtle prickling. Most would ignore it. But for someone in the grip of Ekbom syndrome, that fleeting feeling becomes a threat, a warning, a confirmation. They become hyper-aware of their skin, their hair, their pores. Every bump becomes a bite. Every shadow under the skin becomes a nest. The mind latches onto the belief and won't let go. Soon, the body becomes a battleground. Sufferers scratch themselves raw, dig into their flesh with tweezers, needles, even knives, desperate to extract the invisible invaders. Some collect what they believe are fibers, worms, or insect fragments and place them in jars, convinced they've found proof. They carry these samples from doctor to doctor, demanding validation, and are often met with gentle dismissal or psychiatric referrals, reactions that only deepen their fear and isolation. Imagine the agony of feeling things moving beneath your skin day after day, night after night, and no one believes you. Friends think you're delusional. Doctors stop returning your calls. Your family grows distant, unable to understand why you spend hours in front of the mirror, examining every inch of yourself under harsh light. You stop trusting anyone. You retreat. And the infestation, though imaginary, becomes your entire reality. Ekbom syndrome doesn't just assault the body, it destroys the mind. The constant fear, the humiliation of disbelief, the compulsive rituals, the self-inflicted wounds, all of it forms a cycle of desperation and hopelessness. It's not just that the parasites don't exist. It's that the person is being eaten alive by something no one else can see. The pain is real. The suffering is real. The delusion is not. And that's what makes Ekbom syndrome so cruel. It convinces you that your body is no longer yours, that you are under siege from within, while the world watches you fall apart, refusing to believe a single word. Somatoparaphrenia. Somatoparaphrenia is a cruel and bewildering delusion where a person denies ownership of a part of their own body, most often a limb. The arm is there, attached, visible, and moving when prompted. But in the mind of the sufferer, it is not theirs. It is someone else's. A foreign object. A parasite clinging to their side. Some believe it belongs to a dead person. Others claim it was surgically attached or planted by someone as a cruel joke. But to all who experience it, the message from the brain is devastatingly clear. This is not me. It's more than confusion. It's more than a feeling of detachment. It's a full psychological rejection, a fractured sense of self that turns the body into a battlefield. The affected limb may be ignored, neglected, or treated with disgust. Patients often try to cover it, avoid looking at it, or even ask for it to be removed. Some lash out, hitting or injuring the limb, convinced it has nothing to do with them. Others give it a name, speak of it as his arm or that woman's leg, and insist it was never theirs to begin with. This condition is most often associated with brain damage, typically following a stroke or trauma affecting the right parietal lobe, an area crucial to body awareness and spatial orientation. But the cold clinical explanation cannot prepare anyone for the emotional weight of the experience. Imagine waking up in a hospital bed, looking down, and seeing something attached to you that should not be there. Something unnatural, invasive, wrong. Your brain registers a limb, but your soul rejects it. To the outside world, it can look like madness. To the person inside it, it is horror. They are trapped in a body that has betrayed them, trapped in flesh that feels like a lie. Family members may try to comfort them, point to photos, memories, medical charts. But the delusion doesn't budge. Reality has been rewritten by the brain's glitch, and no amount of love or logic can stitch the two halves back together. Somatoparaphrenia tears apart one of the most sacred bonds we have, the sense that we inhabit our body completely. And when that bond breaks, the result is a quiet, personal kind of terror. The kind that comes not from the outside world, but from the terrifying thought that parts of you no longer belong to you. Autophagia. Autophagia is one of the darkest corners of human psychological suffering, a compulsion so raw and visceral that it drives a person to bite, chew, or mutilate their own body, often with an eerie calm or numb determination. It goes beyond self-harm. It is self-consumption, a biological and emotional implosion, where the body becomes both the victim and the attacker. It often starts in silence, a bite to the inside of the cheek, a nail chewed past the quick. But for those caught in the grip of true autophagia, these small behaviors spiral into something far more horrifying. Fingers are gnawed until bones are exposed. Arms are clawed and shredded with teeth. Flesh is torn, not out of anger or ritual, but because something in the mind whispers that this is the only way to feel, to cope, to exist. Autophagia is frequently rooted in severe trauma, psychosis, schizophrenia, or obsessive-compulsive disorders, but even clinical definitions fail to capture the sheer terror of it. For some, it comes in moments of dissociation, where the body no longer feels like their own, and hurting it feels distant, like biting into meat that has no connection to self. For others, it is about regaining control, punishing themselves, or silencing a mental scream with physical agony. Imagine waking up in a haze only to find your hands bloodied, your skin torn, your mouth aching from what you've done to your own body. And worse, knowing it brought you a fleeting moment of relief. Then the guilt crashes in, the fear, the shame. And yet, when the darkness returns, you do it again. Because somewhere in the storm of your mind, it makes sense. It feels necessary. Those around you may not even notice until it's too late. Autophagia can be hidden, behind bandages, sleeves, silence, and those who suffer from it often say nothing, fearing judgment, institutionalization, or the unbearable pity of those who cannot understand the urge to consume oneself. This condition is not dramatic. It is not theatrical. It is a quiet, vicious war being waged beneath the skin, where the enemy lives in your own flesh, and the only thing louder than the pain is the craving for more of it. Autophagia is not a symptom. It is a scream that is turned inward. Psychogenic amnesia. Psychogenic amnesia is a terrifying fracture in the human psyche, an abrupt, often total loss of memory triggered not by physical injury, but by overwhelming psychological trauma. It's as if the mind, in a desperate act of self-preservation, slams a door shut on the past and throws away the key. Names vanish. Faces become strangers. The self dissolves into fog. You are awake, breathing, walking through the world. But your history is gone, erased not by disease, but by pain too great to bear. Unlike neurological amnesia caused by brain damage, psychogenic amnesia leaves the brain intact, but scrambles access to personal identity. The person may still know how to speak, drive, or use a phone, but they no longer know who they are. Birthdays, childhood, family, even their own name may disappear, They might be found wandering, disoriented, far from home, unable to explain where they've been or why. And when questioned, they look up with hollow confusion, as if searching for a person who should be inside them but isn't anymore. The cause is almost always deep emotional trauma: abuse, assault, war, the sudden loss of a loved one. Something so devastating that the mind chooses silence over memory. In some cases, the person disappears entirely, taking on a new name, a new identity, building a temporary life with no understanding of who they used to be. Weeks or months later, they may wake up suddenly with memories flooding back, shocked to realize the person they've been was never real. This condition is as tragic for loved ones as it is for the sufferer. Imagine a spouse or child watching someone they know intimately stare back at them with blank eyes, polite, even kind, but utterly devoid of recognition. Imagine the heartbreak of saying, "I love you," to someone who responds, "I'm sorry, I don't know you." Psychogenic amnesia is not forgetfulness. It is a blackout of the soul, a deep vault slammed shut to protect what's left of a shattered psyche. It is memory turned ghost, identity turned stranger. And though recovery is sometimes possible, the scars it leaves behind, on relationships, on the sense of self, can last far longer than the forgotten past. Split brain conflicts. Split brain conflicts are a rare and disorienting psychological phenomenon that occur when the two hemispheres of the brain, left and right, are severed, disconnected, and begin to function almost independently. This typically follows a drastic surgical procedure known as a corpus callosotomy, often performed to control severe epilepsy. But what emerges in the aftermath is something that feels more like science fiction than medical reality. One body, two minds, coexisting in constant, silent conflict. Patients with split brain syndrome may appear normal on the surface, walking, talking, interacting like anyone else. But beneath that calm exterior, something extraordinary and unsettling is unfolding. The left hemisphere, which controls language, cannot communicate directly with the right hemisphere, which governs spatial awareness, emotional processing, and much of what we call intuition. The result? A fractured internal dialogue, a consciousness split in two. Imagine your left hand suddenly unbuttons your shirt while your right hand buttons it back up. Or you reach for a glass with one hand, only for the other to knock it away. These are not clumsy accidents. They are manifestations of separate wills inhabiting the same body, one side unaware of the other's motives or intentions. A person may say they want to perform one task while their hand, acting independently, sabotages them, not out of mischief, out of neurological division. Perhaps most eerie is the emotional confusion. The right hemisphere may feel anger, fear, or sadness, but the left hemisphere, which verbalizes emotion, doesn't know why. The person may smile while internally seething, may cry and not be able to say what's wrong. This disconnect can erode identity, triggering existential distress. Who am I, if part of me is hidden from myself? If my hands can argue? If my brain can lie to itself? There is no peace in a split brain conflict. Only contradiction. Only the eerie sensation that your body is no longer unified, that there is another you inside of you, pulling strings you can't see. Thought becomes scattered, intention becomes ambiguous, and control is never absolute. This is not a metaphor for indecision. This is biological fragmentation, real, observable, and terrifying. The self becomes divided, not in feeling, but in function. And once you've seen your own mind rebel, you never trust silence in your head the same way again. Alien hand syndrome. Alien hand syndrome is a chilling neurological disorder in which a person's hand seems to act with a will of its own, moving, grabbing, touching, or even attacking without the person's intention or control. It is not a tic. It is not a spasm. It is a hand that behaves like it belongs to someone else entirely. The person watches, in real time, as their own limb becomes a stranger, unpredictable, uninvited, and unnervingly alive. This syndrome often arises after brain surgery, stroke, or damage to the corpus callosum, the bridge between the two hemispheres of the brain. When that communication breaks down, the two sides of the body begin to fall out of sync, and the hand, no longer tethered to conscious thought, begins to drift into autonomy. What follows is a psychological horror story playing out through flesh, a war between body and mind. Sufferers describe feeling possessed by their own hand. It may unbutton a shirt the other hand just buttoned. It may close a door the person was trying to walk through. Some hands slap their owner's face. Others reach out to touch people, grab objects, or destroy things without warning. And the person can only watch, sometimes pleading with it out loud, begging it to stop, as if trying to reason with a wild animal attached to their own body. The psychological toll is immense. The body becomes a battleground. The basic assumption that I control myself begins to unravel. Many develop anxiety, depression, or fear being around others, terrified of what their hand might do next. They may bind it, sit on it, or isolate themselves completely. Because how do you explain to someone that your hand isn't yours anymore? It's not just disturbing, it's humiliating, it's maddening. Imagine trying to rest while your hand keeps tugging at your sheets. Imagine trying to speak to someone as your arm involuntarily reaches toward their face. You are fully awake, fully aware, and yet a part of you has broken free, behaving as if it has its own twisted version of intent. Alien hand syndrome is the stuff of nightmares, not because it's dramatic, but because it violates the most sacred contract we have with ourselves, that our body is ours, and it listens when we speak. When that pact is broken, even the simplest moments, like reaching for a glass of water, become scenes of dread. Synesthesia psychosis. Synesthesia psychosis is a rare and overwhelming collision between perception and madness, where the senses no longer stay in their lanes, and the mind can no longer tell what is real. In this state, the brain blends sound, color, texture, emotion, even memory, into a single, chaotic storm of experience. But unlike the harmless or even beautiful form of synesthesia that some are born with, this version is invasive, uncontrolled, and terrifying. It doesn't enhance the world, it consumes it. A person in the grip of synesthesia psychosis might hear colors screaming in their ears, feel words crawling across their skin, or taste emotions as if they were physical objects. It's not poetic. It's not artistic. It's disorienting, relentless, and deeply destabilizing. The brain no longer filters input correctly. Every stimulus is a fire alarm. Every thought triggers a sensory explosion. The walls may pulse with sound. The air may taste like rust. The touch of another person may feel like being electrocuted through invisible wires. At first, it may seem like a surreal curiosity, music that paints the sky, laughter that glows like neon, but it quickly descends into chaos. The sensations grow louder, harsher, more threatening. The brain begins making connections that don't exist, seeing malevolence in colors, hearing threats in textures, feeling pain from a word whispered across a room. It is as though the boundaries of reality dissolve, and the senses become a hall of mirrors where nothing is true and everything is too much. People suffering from this often cannot sleep, cannot eat, cannot even form coherent speech. The overload is constant. A passing sound can feel like being stabbed with glass. The wrong texture underfoot might trigger nausea or panic. They may try to hide from light, cover their ears, scratch at their own skin, not because they're hallucinating, but because the very input of reality has become corrupted. To outsiders, they may appear manic, frightened, confused, but inside, they are trapped in a body that no longer communicates with the world properly. A single touch, a sudden sound, a flicker of light becomes torture. Synesthesia. Psychosis is not beauty turned up too loud. It is beauty turned into madness. It is the horror of a mind that sees too much, feels too much, and is breaking apart under the weight of a world that won't stop touching it from every direction. Pseudopsiesis. Pseudopsiesis is one of the most haunting mind-body illusions, a condition in which a person becomes utterly convinced they are pregnant, and their body believes it too. The stomach swells, breasts enlarge, morning sickness appears, menstruation stops. They may even feel fetal movements, but there is no baby. There never was. It is a psychological pregnancy so vivid, so persuasive, that even medical tests struggle to break the spell. The mind has told the body a lie so powerful that the body makes it real. This delusion doesn't emerge from nowhere. Often, it takes root in a perfect storm of longing, loss, trauma, and psychological vulnerability. It strikes women who desperately want a child, women with unresolved grief over infertility or miscarriage, and sometimes those suffering from severe mental health conditions like depression, bipolar disorder, or psychosis. In other cases, it appears in abusive relationships, where pregnancy is imagined as an escape, a shield, or a way to feel valued. The womb, under this illusion, becomes a place of hope, and the lie, a survival mechanism. But hope eventually turns into horror. As the months pass and no fetal heartbeat is found, no ultrasound reveals life, the cracks begin to show. Yet the person clings to the belief. They may accuse doctors of incompetence, believe the baby is hiding, or think there's a conspiracy to deny the pregnancy. The emotional devastation that follows the truth is not just disappointment, it is the unraveling of an identity built around the idea of motherhood. Family members often don't know how to respond. They see the glow, the tenderness, the careful preparation, and then the confusion, the denial, the heartbreak. Some play along out of compassion. Others push too hard and trigger deep panic or rage, because to the sufferer, this isn't fantasy. It is as real as breath. Pseudopsiesis is not manipulation. It is not attention-seeking. It is the body echoing the ache of the soul, mirroring a need so intense it rewrites biology. It's a heartbreaking testament to the mind's power over flesh and the unbearable weight of unmet desire. In the end, there is no child to mourn, but the grief is real. So is the love. So is the loss. Hyperphantasia. Overload. Hyperphantasia. Overload is the hidden torment of a mind that cannot stop seeing. A psychological flood caused by an imagination so vivid, so uncontrollably intense, that it begins to blur the line between thought and reality. People with hyperphantasia experience mental imagery as if it were painted across the inside of their skull. Crisp, colorful, detailed, alive. But when that vividness turns to overload, it stops being a gift and becomes a relentless assault. Every thought becomes a movie. Every memory plays out in full cinematic detail, uninvited and unstoppable. The mind never shuts off. Closing your eyes doesn't bring rest. It brings immersion. You don't imagine a place. You're in it. You don't remember a trauma. You relive it. A single intrusive thought blooms into a vivid three-dimensional world that you can't step out of, no matter how hard you try. And you are trapped, inside your own mind, in a theater that never dims the lights. This overload can become emotionally paralyzing. A moment of anxiety becomes a full-blown apocalypse in your head. A fleeting worry spirals into a visualized disaster with screaming faces, fire, chaos, your heart pounding as your brain pulls you deeper into the illusion. Conversations are replayed over and over with perfect facial expressions, imagined consequences, altered outcomes. Every social interaction becomes a mental reenactment. Every regret becomes a memory carved in high definition. Sleep offers no escape. Dreams are vivid, exhausting, often indistinguishable from waking life. Some wake up disoriented, not knowing if what they saw was real. Some lose the ability to focus, constantly pulled into daydreams or visions that hijack the present. Productivity suffers. Relationships suffer. Reality becomes a pale, flickering background to the firestorm of the imagination. To the outside world, this torment is invisible. People with hyperphantasia are often praised for their creativity, but few see the suffering underneath. No one sees the panic when an intrusive image slams into the mind like a freight train. No one hears the screaming inside their mental pictures. Hyperphantasia. Overload is not just thinking vividly. It is being trapped in the mind's projections, unable to silence them, unable to rest, haunted by the beauty, the terror, and the unrelenting clarity of a brain that refuses to look away. Transient global amnesia. Transient global amnesia is a sudden and disorienting rupture in time, a rare and deeply unsettling condition in which the ability to form new memories vanishes without warning, leaving the sufferer lost in a looping present that resets every few minutes. They are awake. They are aware. They can speak, walk, answer questions. But the moment they try to hold on to a new piece of reality, it slips through their fingers like water. And so they ask again, and again, and again. Where am I? Why am I here? What day is it? To everyone around them, it feels like watching a soul drowning in shallow water. They look fine, physically unharmed, calm, maybe even polite. But behind the eyes is confusion, raw and growing, as the world becomes something they can't anchor themselves in. A doctor explains what's happening. They nod, seem to understand. But 5 minutes later, the same question resurfaces, as if the conversation never happened. Each answer falls into a void. Each moment is born, dies, and is forgotten. The episode can last a few hours, sometimes longer, but it always ends abruptly. The memories of the event itself are never recovered. The brain protects itself by not recording the trauma, but the aftermath is often filled with dread and vulnerability. The person remembers who they are, their family, their past, but they have no idea what happened during those hours of vanishing time. It is a black hole in the narrative of their life. No one knows exactly what causes it. It is not a stroke, not epilepsy, not a head injury. It often comes on suddenly, sometimes after physical exertion or emotional shock. And while it rarely recurs, the fear it leaves behind is hard to shake. Imagine living through a few hours of your life where everything resets every few minutes. Imagine your spouse having to explain who you are to them over and over, while their eyes search your face like it's the first time. Transient global amnesia is not amnesia in movies. It's quiet. It's eerie. It's standing on the edge of your own consciousness, watching pieces of yourself drift away, again and again, until, mercifully, the clock starts ticking forward once more. Phantom borderline episodes. Phantom borderline episodes are an invisible war within the self, a sudden, jarring disassociation where a person no longer recognizes who they are, what they feel, or why they're behaving the way they are. It strikes without warning. There's no clear trigger, no obvious trauma, just a quiet click inside the mind, and suddenly the person watching through their own eyes feels like a stranger in their own skin. Unlike typical borderline personality episodes, which often stem from abandonment or intense emotional conflict, these phantom episodes drift in like smoke, untraceable and untethered. A person may go from stable and grounded to impulsive, hostile, emotionally flooded, or numb within minutes. One moment they are laughing with a friend, the next they are emotionally unreachable or erratic, speaking in tones they don't recognize, making choices they don't understand. When it ends, they're left dazed and ashamed, piecing together behavior they barely remember as their own. The terror of a phantom episode is not just in the behavior, it's in the absence of reason. There's no fight, no betrayal, no panic, just a sudden vanishing of the self, like someone else pulled the strings for a while. It's waking up mid-sentence and not recognizing the words coming out of your mouth. It's looking in the mirror and feeling your face doesn't belong to you. It's arguing with someone you love and having no idea why you're saying what you're saying, only to feel emotionally wrecked afterward, as if it happened to someone else entirely. These episodes often leave behind a wake of confusion and regret. The sufferer might isolate, fearing they'll lose control again. Friends and loved ones are left stunned by the whiplash, unsure if what they saw was a true expression or a temporary possession. The person who experiences it is forced to play detective on their own psyche, trying to trace where they went and why. But there's often no answer. That's what makes them phantom. They aren't anchored in logic, memory, or even pain. They just are. Sudden shifts into an alternate version of self, as if the mind had cracked open just wide enough to let something else walk in. And when it walks back out, you're left picking up the pieces of a self you didn't even recognize. Shadow syndrome. Shadow syndrome is the ghost in the machine, the echo of a mental illness that never fully takes shape, yet still quietly poisons the rhythm of a person's life. It is the presence of symptoms too mild, too scattered, or too inconsistent to meet clinical thresholds, but still powerful enough to distort behavior, fracture relationships, and slowly drain the soul. It's walking through life just functional enough to avoid diagnosis, but never quite well enough to feel whole. You are never sick, but you are never okay either. A person with shadow syndrome might never be diagnosed with depression, but still wake up every day feeling hollow and joyless. They might not have anxiety disorder, yet find themselves panicking over small uncertainties, avoiding people, overthinking every word they speak. They may not have OCD, yet feel compelled to check the door 5 times before leaving the house. Not bad enough to be treated. Not normal enough to rest. This space between diagnosis and denial is where shadow syndrome lives, and it's where millions quietly suffer, dismissed, misunderstood, misdiagnosed. Their pain doesn't light up charts or trigger alarms. It lurks beneath the surface, shaping their personality, sabotaging ambition, dulling happiness. Their relationships fray from the unpredictability. Their dreams shrink from the exhaustion. They may function at work, hold conversations, even laugh. But inside, there is a quiet war raging, a daily negotiation between survival and collapse. The most devastating part of shadow syndrome is its invisibility. The person often gaslights themselves. Why can't I just get it together? Why do I feel broken if nothing is wrong? Doctors tell them they're fine. Friends say they're just tired. And so they carry on, pretending, performing, until the weight becomes too much. This syndrome whispers rather than screams. It doesn't destroy, it erodes. It doesn't shatter the mind. It wears it down with small, constant cuts. And because it's never loud enough to demand attention, it often goes untreated, unspoken, unseen. But make no mistake, shadow syndrome is real. It is the quiet death of well-being beneath a mask of almost happy, almost normal, almost safe. It is a life lived in emotional grayscale, just bright enough to pass, but dark enough to never fully live. Synesthetic hallucinations. Synesthetic hallucinations are among the most deeply invasive and misunderstood forms of hallucination. Disturbing sensory experiences that arise from within the body rather than from the world around it. They aren't voices or visions. They're feelings. Real, vivid, physical sensations of movement, shifting, pressure, stretching, or twisting, happening deep inside the flesh. And yet, nothing is there. To someone experiencing a synesthetic hallucination, the body becomes a stage for invisible horrors. They may feel as though something is crawling under their skin, writhing through their muscles, or coiled around their organs. Some report a burning inside their veins, a slow turning in their gut, an electric hum just beneath the surface. Others feel as though their bones are being pulled apart, that their insides are shrinking, melting, growing. It is intimate, constant, and terrifying. And worst of all, no one can see it. No one can measure it. But to the person inside it, the torment is real. These hallucinations often appear in severe psychosis, schizophrenia, trauma-related disorders, or neurological breakdowns. The brain misinterprets internal signals and creates a distorted sense of embodiment. It tells the person, "Your body is not safe." But it doesn't say it with thoughts, it says it with sensation. You are not simply imagining things, you are feeling them. You become hyper-aware of your body, but not in a grounding, mindful way, in a way that feels like you're being inhabited by something alien. There is no peace, no stillness. Lying down does not soothe it. Doctors often find nothing wrong on scans, and that silence, the absence of validation, only adds to the horror. Because how do you prove your stomach is twisting in on itself when no one else can feel it? How do you convince someone that your spine is humming, that your throat pulses like it's filled with bees, that your heart feels wrapped in wire? People suffering from synesthetic hallucinations often fall into despair, terrified they're losing their mind, or that some invisible disease is consuming them. They might seek endless tests, trying to prove what their brain is inventing. But the suffering doesn't come from the lack of proof. It comes from the unbearable reality of feeling betrayed by your own body, haunted not by ghosts, but by your own nervous system whispering lies through sensation. Psychotic microdreams. Psychotic microdreams are waking hallucinations that crash into consciousness like fragments of a dream ripped from sleep and jammed into reality. These are not full delusions, not vivid nightmares. They are flashes, surreal, distorted, and often terrifying intrusions that strike while the person is wide awake. A man walking down the street suddenly sees his hand melt into glass. A woman reading a book feels the pages whisper back at her. The world doesn't fully disappear. It just tilts, briefly, unnervingly, and then returns to normal, leaving behind a residue of dread. These moments are short, sometimes seconds, sometimes just a blink, but their impact is profound. They feel like daydreams gone wrong, like reality stuttering, letting in pieces of a dimension that doesn't belong. You might hear voices, see impossible images, or feel things that defy explanation. A hand brushing your shoulder when no one is there, your reflection blinking out of sync, the room briefly shifting into something unrecognizable. Unlike full psychosis, the person often retains some awareness. They know, somewhere in the back of their mind, that what just happened wasn't supposed to happen. But that awareness doesn't lessen the fear, it amplifies it. Because if you're awake, alert, functioning, then why did your mind just break through the floor? Psychotic microdreams often occur in the early stages of schizophrenia, severe stress, sleep deprivation, or trauma recovery. They're a warning signal, a crack forming in the psychological surface. And though they may not lead to full-blown psychosis, the fear they induce can spiral. The mind becomes hypervigilant, watching for the next glitch. People begin to doubt their sanity, avoid silence, avoid solitude. Because when you're alone, that's when they come. Those tiny nightmares with no beginning and no meaning, just flashes of something wrong. They can be grotesque or subtle. A child's laugh behind you, a spider crawling out of a wall socket, a sudden shift in gravity, like the floor just bent. They don't ask permission. They don't follow rules. They drop into consciousness like glass shattering in a church, jarring, sacred, impossible to ignore. Psychotic microdreams are not dreams. They are trespassers in the daylight, a warning that the border between the mind and the void is thinner than we like to believe, and sometimes it doesn't hold. Severe déjà vécu. Severe déjà vécu is a psychological time trap, a chronic, suffocating condition in which a person feels that every single moment of their life is something they have already lived, down to the smallest detail. It goes far beyond the fleeting familiarity of déjà vu. This is not a passing glitch in memory. It is a constant, obsessive, and paralyzing belief that time is looping, that nothing is new, and that every experience is a grim rerun of something that has already happened. Imagine waking up and brushing your teeth, only to feel with absolute certainty that you've done this exact thing before, not just yesterday, but again and again. The same hand movement, the same sound of water, the same flicker of light across the mirror. Then it happens again as you tie your shoes. Then again when you turn on the TV. The conversations feel recycled. The weather feels staged. Even your own thoughts feel plagiarized from some prior version of yourself. And yet, nothing in your memory explains why. It's more than eerie. It's maddening. People with severe déjà vu often begin to question the very fabric of reality. If every moment feels like a memory, then what is now? What is real? Some begin to fear that they are trapped in a time loop, cursed to repeat their life endlessly. Others believe they are dead, or in a simulation, or suffering divine punishment. The world begins to rot into a performance, and they are the only one who knows the script. The psychological toll is immense. Joy disappears. Curiosity vanishes. Why read a book when you already know every word? Why meet someone new if you're convinced you've already spoken to them, laughed with them, fought with them, lost them? The brain becomes a prison cell made of echoes, where the past bleeds into the present and strangles the future before it can even arrive. Medical scans often reveal no damage. Doctors can't find the glitch, and that makes the sufferer feel even more cursed. Because if nothing is wrong, why does everything feel so wrong? Severe déjà vu doesn't just rob you of novelty, it erodes the entire structure of time, leaving you stranded in a world where every moment is a memory and every breath feels like the ghost of the one before. Reverse amnesia. Reverse amnesia is not the loss of memory, it's the inability to let memory go. It's a condition so rare and so quietly torturous that it feels almost fictional. A mind that forgets nothing, recalls everything, and cannot filter, dim, or shut off the flood of information pouring through it. Every detail, every slight, every conversation, every mistake, etched in high definition, replayable at will, and never softened by time. The blessing of memory becomes a prison of perfect recall. This condition, sometimes linked to what's known as highly superior autobiographical memory, HSAM, might sound like a gift. People with it can remember what they wore on a random Tuesday 20 years ago, what song was playing on the radio, what someone said verbatim in an offhand comment. But the reality is far more haunting. Because they also remember every heartbreak, every humiliation, every trauma, and every dark moment they've ever experienced, with a vividness that refuses to fade. Imagine being unable to forget the worst thing anyone's ever said to you. Now imagine it playing on a loop. Not once in a while, but every single day. A throwaway insult from childhood can feel as raw and cutting now as it did then. A traumatic moment replays not as a distant memory, but as a sensory invasion. You feel it, smell it, live it again. Time does not heal. Time freezes. The emotional overload is staggering. While most people's brains blur or bury unnecessary memories to protect them, these minds do not. They are cluttered, overstimulated, overflowing with detail. Decision-making becomes agonizing because every past choice still screams for attention. Relationships strain under the weight of remembered slights that the other person has long since forgotten. Arguments become endless because nothing is ever truly resolved when nothing is ever truly forgotten. Sleep becomes difficult. Peace becomes rare. Even joy is haunted by the echo of what came before it. And unlike traditional amnesia, reverse amnesia is invisible. Outsiders may envy the memory, admire the precision, but they don't see the toll. They don't feel the exhaustion of carrying decades of pain, shame, and sorrow all at once, all the time. Reverse amnesia isn't about remembering too much. It's about never being allowed to move on. Lada syndrome. Lada syndrome is a haunting, culturally bound psychological phenomenon where the boundary between self-control and involuntary reaction collapses in a flash, triggered by an unexpected sound, movement, or touch. It begins with an intense startle, the kind that makes the whole body jolt, the breath catch, and the heart thunder. But for those with Lada, that startle doesn't fade. It opens the door to something far stranger, more disturbing, a trance-like state where the mind becomes possessed by mimicry. Once startled, the person may begin repeating words automatically, often obscene or nonsensical. They may mimic gestures, copy voices, obey commands without thinking, or fall into echolalia and echopraxia, compulsively repeating others' actions and phrases like a human echo. The eyes glaze, the limbs twitch, and the personality seems to temporarily evaporate. What remains is a vessel, responsive but hollow. Sometimes there is laughter, sometimes screaming, sometimes bizarre movements that seem disconnected from will or awareness. What makes Lada so uniquely unsettling is the loss of autonomy. The person is not pretending. They are not in control. Something hijacks them, even if only for a few minutes. In those moments, they may be vulnerable to commands, even dangerous or humiliating ones, obeying without question, as if the self has been swept out to sea and left the body behind. Most commonly documented in Southeast Asia, particularly among older women in Malaysia and Indonesia, Lada has been viewed both as a cultural syndrome and a neuropsychiatric condition. But wherever it occurs, the core horror remains the same: a sudden, involuntary surrender of agency. It is not just a body reacting. It is the self unraveling in real time. Those who suffer from it often live in quiet fear. Fear of loud noises, of sudden surprises, of being exposed to ridicule or coercion during an episode. Friends or family may treat it with humor, teasing reactions out of them. But behind the laughter is helplessness. No one wants to be the puppet of their own nervous system. Lada syndrome turns the ordinary reflex of being startled into a portal, one that leads not to fear, but to something far more alien. A state where your voice, your movements, your will are no longer your own, and every moment of silence is a countdown to the next involuntary surrender. Status dissociatus. Status. Dissociatus is a terrifying unraveling of the brain's most basic rhythm, the boundary between sleep and wakefulness. In this rare and disorienting condition, the natural separation between stages of consciousness disintegrates, leaving the mind stuck in a chaotic twilight where sleep, dreams, and reality bleed into one another. The sufferer is neither fully awake nor fully asleep. Instead, they become trapped in a limbo, where their body behaves one way, their mind another, and the rules of time, logic, and identity fall apart. Normally, our brains cycle through distinct phases: deep sleep, REM sleep, and wakefulness, each with its own neurological signature. But in status dissociatus, those walls collapse. REM dreams may erupt during waking moments. Motor functions, normally paralyzed during REM, may activate during deep sleep. Consciousness flickers in and out without warning. The brain becomes a malfunctioning switchboard, sending mixed signals that leave the person disoriented, exhausted, and psychologically fractured. Imagine waking up and being unable to tell whether you're dreaming or awake. You try to speak, but the words don't make sense. Your muscles twitch violently. You might scream or move without control, caught in a moment that feels real but isn't, or is, but in the wrong context. You might sit up, eyes open, body moving, yet be in the middle of a vivid, violent dream. Or worse, your mind might be fully awake, but your body frozen, unable to respond, while strange dream images bleed into the room around you. It's not just confusion, it's mental vertigo, a constant instability that turns sleep into an unreliable torment and waking life into a fog of half-processed memories and lingering hallucinations. There is no safe place, not in bed, not in daylight. The body no longer obeys natural rhythms. The mind no longer knows when to rest. Insomnia becomes unbearable, but sleep offers no relief. Status dissociatus is most often seen in severe neurodegenerative diseases like multiple system atrophy, but even in its rarer forms, it is a psychological purgatory. It takes the structure of consciousness itself, something we depend on without thinking, and turns it into shifting sand. The result is a life lived without anchors, where the mind drifts endlessly between nightmare and awareness, and the boundary between real and not real dissolves into a terrifying blur. Culturally bound delusions. Culturally bound delusions are a chilling reminder that the human mind doesn't go mad in isolation. It breaks in patterns shaped by belief, myth, religion, and tradition. These are not universal psychoses. They are uniquely sculpted by the culture they emerge from, and within that cultural framework, they make terrifying, twisted sense. They are stories the mind tells itself when it can no longer tell what's real. And those stories are written in the language of ancestry, geography, and fear passed down through generations. Imagine believing your soul has been stolen because someone looked at you with envy. Imagine feeling your genitals are shrinking into your body and that you will die unless someone stops it, right now. Imagine becoming convinced that you are being possessed by ancestral spirits because you broke a taboo. These beliefs sound absurd outside of their cultural context, but for the sufferer, and often their community, they are reality, and they are horrifying. In West Africa, Koro involves an overwhelming belief that the penis is retracting into the abdomen, and that this will cause death. In Southeast Asia, Amok manifests as sudden, violent outbursts by seemingly calm individuals, followed by complete amnesia. In Japan, hikikomori isn't just isolation. It's a psychological exile so deep it becomes a lifestyle of total withdrawal. In Haiti and parts of Africa, zombification delusions lead people to believe they are dead, enslaved, and cursed, alive but not human. What makes these delusions so insidious is that they do not feel like madness to those experiencing them. They are supported, sometimes reinforced, by cultural narratives, folklore, even community reactions. Instead of being dismissed, they are often feared or treated with spiritual rituals. The line between psychiatric illness and cultural belief begins to blur, and treatment becomes a minefield of misunderstanding. Culturally bound delusions show that psychosis doesn't just fracture the mind, it reflects the society it breaks within. The brain pulls from the darkest corners of belief to explain the unexplainable pain. And in doing so, it builds prisons perfectly tailored to the world the sufferer was raised in. In these delusions, culture doesn't just shape identity. It shapes the very form of madness, turning psychosis into a mirror, one that reflects not only the broken mind, but the fears, myths, and shadows of an entire civilization. Hysterical blindness. Hysterical blindness, also known as functional or psychogenic blindness, is a devastating and mysterious condition in which a person loses their vision, not because their eyes are damaged, but because the mind refuses to see. There is no physical trauma, no detectable defect in the retina or optic nerve. The eyes are open, the pupils respond to light, but the world goes dark, and no one, not even the sufferer, can explain why. This blindness is born not from the body, but from the psyche. It often strikes after intense emotional trauma, unresolved inner conflict, or unbearable stress. The mind, overwhelmed and unable to cope, shuts off a part of perception as a desperate act of self-protection. It is as if the brain declares, "If I cannot escape the pain, then I will shut out the world that delivers it." To the person suffering from it, the blindness is real. They stumble, they reach out, They cry out in confusion and fear. And yet, medical tests return blank. Doctors tell them their eyes are fine, that their vision should work. But it doesn't. Because this isn't a malfunction of the eyes, it's a fracture of the mind. And being told nothing is wrong only deepens the despair. Imagine the terror of waking up one morning and seeing nothing. Not light, not shadows, just void. You reach for help, but you're met with disbelief. People assume you're faking, seeking attention, playing games. But you're not. You're trapped in a darkness no one believes in, struggling with a body that won't explain itself, and a mind that has betrayed you in silence. Often, the blindness arrives alongside other conversion symptoms: paralysis, numbness, seizures, expressions of emotional pain transformed into physical dysfunction. It is the body screaming when the voice cannot. And beneath it all is often a wound, abuse, grief, guilt, or trauma so deep that the subconscious brain finds blindness less terrifying than seeing the world as it is. Recovery can happen, sometimes suddenly, sometimes over time, but the fear of relapse lingers. And even when sight returns, the memory of that darkness never leaves. Hysterical blindness is not a trick of the senses. It is the mind's silent, desperate plea to stop seeing what it can no longer bear to face. Mass psychogenic illness. Mass psychogenic illness, also known as mass hysteria, is a psychological wildfire, an invisible contagion that doesn't spread through blood or breath, but through fear, suggestion, and the desperate human need to make sense of the unexplainable. It begins with one person, maybe two, feeling something strange: a fainting spell, a choking sensation, a sudden twitch, and within hours, dozens, sometimes hundreds, begin to feel the same. There's no virus, no poison, no external threat. And yet the symptoms are real. The suffering is real. And it moves like a ghost across crowds, schools, factories, even entire villages. Mass psychogenic illness thrives in environments of stress, fear, and uncertainty, places where emotional pressure simmers just below the surface. A school exam season, a factory under threat of closure, a remote town with no explanation for a strange smell or sound. One person collapses, another gasps, a third convulses. And suddenly, the mind begins to believe, it's happening to me too. The body follows. Heart rates climb, muscles cramp, people vomit, faint, tremble, scream. Some go blind. Some lose the ability to speak. Some feel like they're dying. And the terror multiplies. Because what we see, we believe. And what we believe, our bodies begin to feel. Witnessing someone else panic activates the same pathways in our own brain. Mirror neurons firing, adrenaline surging. In the chaos, logic disappears. The question is no longer, is this real? It becomes, how bad will it get? One of the most disturbing aspects of mass psychogenic illness is how it dissolves identity. People stop being individuals. They become a collective nervous system, linked not by biology, but by shared fear. In some outbreaks, children claw at their throats, believing invisible toxins are in the air. In others, workers scream of invisible insects crawling under their skin. And there's nothing to trace. No toxicology, no pathogen, only fear. To outsiders, it often looks ridiculous. To the sufferers, it's pure horror. And when it's over, hours, days, or weeks later, those affected are often left confused, embarrassed, or completely unaware of what happened. Mass psychogenic illness is not imagined. It is embodied trauma, passed like a spark from mind to mind, until an entire community burns with symptoms that have no origin, except the one we cannot see. The silent, buried terror we all carry just beneath the surface. Psychogenic seizures. Psychogenic seizures, also known as non-epileptic seizures or PNES, psychogenic non-epileptic seizures, are a terrifying betrayal of the body, violent, uncontrollable episodes that mimic epilepsy in every way except one. They do not come from electrical malfunctions in the brain. They come from trauma. They come from pain. They come from wounds that have no visible scars. To an outside observer, the seizure looks real. The person may collapse, convulse, lose consciousness, cry out, or become catatonic. Their body trembles. Their breathing changes. Their eyes roll back. Emergency services are called. Tests are run. But the brain scans return clean. No abnormal electrical activity. No neurological explanation. That's when doctors say what the sufferer dreads hearing most. It's not real. But it is real. Terrifyingly real. Because psychogenic seizures are not fabricated or faked. They are the body's desperate, unconscious response to emotional trauma that has never been processed. The mind, overwhelmed and cornered by memories, stress, or psychological damage, pulls the emergency brake, and the body collapses. It's the scream that couldn't be voiced, the breakdown that couldn't be admitted, the grief or fear or rage that had nowhere else to go. The person may have been abused, assaulted, or lived through repeated trauma. They may have buried their pain so deeply that even they don't know what's hiding beneath the surface. And then, one day, the body starts to fall. In a mall, at work, in their bedroom, without warning. And every time it happens, it reinforces the fear. Something is wrong with me. I'm broken. I'm not safe in my own body. Because of the stigma, because of how the world misunderstands psychosomatic conditions, sufferers of psychogenic seizures are often left feeling humiliated, invalidated, or ignored. They're told to calm down, to stop overreacting, to get therapy. But what they need is compassion. What they need is for someone to recognize the truth, that this is trauma made flesh. Psychogenic seizures are not lies. They are buried truths erupting through the skin, a mind screaming for help through a body that no longer knows how to carry the weight. It is not the brain misfiring. It is the soul crashing through the surface in a final, desperate plea to be heard. Delusional parasitosis. Delusional parasitosis is a relentless psychological torment in which the mind becomes convinced that the body is infested with insects, parasites, or invasive creatures, despite all evidence to the contrary. This belief doesn't come as a passing fear. It is obsessive. It is absolute. It grips the person with such certainty that no doctor, no test, no X-ray or biopsy can convince them otherwise. They feel it. They see it. And they suffer in silence, often for years, inside a body that becomes a personal battleground. The sensations are visceral, itching, crawling, biting. The skin prickles. Tiny legs seem to move beneath the surface. Some describe feeling burrowing beneath their nails, others a constant movement in their scalp or eyes. The discomfort grows into panic, and panic into obsession. Victims spend hours examining their skin, digging, scratching, picking. Some collect evidence, tiny fibers, scabs, lint, dust, preserved in jars or envelopes, and brought to doctors as proof of the infestation that everyone else refuses to see. But no infestation is ever found. Lab tests come back negative. Specialists find nothing. Dermatologists see only irritated skin caused by the sufferer's own hands. And so begins the cruel spiral. If science can't find it, it must be something new, something undetectable, something worse. The mental isolation becomes unbearable. Friends withdraw. Families grow frustrated. Doctors dismiss them, suspecting drug use or delusion. But the person is not faking. The pain is real. The fear is real. And when no one believes them, paranoia festers. Some turn their homes into sterilized zones, obsessively cleaning, covering mirrors, sealing windows with tape. Others live in self-imposed exile, ashamed of the bugs they think they're carrying. In extreme cases, the self-harm is horrific. People slice open their skin to extract imagined larvae. They pour chemicals on themselves, burn their scalp, rip out hair. They do this not for attention, but for relief. For the chance, however fleeting, to silence the nightmare crawling just beneath the skin. Delusional parasitosis is the mind turning inward in revolt, transforming psychological suffering into physical horror. It is a waking, itching, living nightmare in which your body becomes the enemy, and reality bends under the weight of a fear that refuses to be proven wrong. Mesiaesthesia. Mesiaesthesia is a deep, irrational revulsion to certain textures, sensations, or tactile experiences. An invisible, often misunderstood form of sensory torment that transforms everyday contact into unbearable psychological distress. For those who suffer from it, the world is full of silent landmines. The feeling of cotton, velvet, chalk, microfiber, or even bare skin against skin can trigger instant waves of disgust, anxiety, or panic. It's not discomfort, it's repulsion. Primal, visceral, inescapable. The brain doesn't simply dislike these sensations, it rejects them, violently. Imagine getting dressed and feeling the inside of your shirt as a crawling, itchy parasite you cannot peel off. Imagine touching a napkin and feeling as though your nerves have been set on fire. The texture gets under your skin, not metaphorically, but as if your very body is rebelling against contact. Some sufferers gag, some cry, some freeze in horror at seemingly harmless stimuli. Children often experience it early, but many adults never grow out of it. It's frequently misdiagnosed or dismissed as oversensitivity or drama. But for the person trapped in this nightmare, the threat is very real. Everyday tasks, putting on socks, using certain bedding, holding someone's hand, become emotionally exhausting. Unlike phobias, mesiaesthesia is not about fear. It's about a sensory violation that sparks rage, nausea, or panic. The texture doesn't have to be slimy or painful. It can be soft, smooth, even clean. But something in the neural wiring causes the touch to feel wrong, as if the brain cannot process it properly and instead launches an alarm response. In some, the reaction spreads to sound. Certain materials rubbing together become unbearable to hear, or even to sight. Just seeing certain textures can create phantom sensations, sparking psychosomatic discomfort. It becomes isolating. People avoid hugging, avoid certain clothing, dread medical visits, or even fear being touched. And the worst part? There is no visible injury, no blood, no bruises. Just an overwhelming sense of being trapped inside a body that is constantly assaulted by sensations no one else can feel. Mesiaesthesia is the silent war between skin and mind, a battle that turns touch, the most human of experiences, into something alien, revolting, and unforgiving. Time dilation psychosis. Time dilation psychosis is a suffocating psychological state in which time itself seems to stretch, slow, and eventually fracture, each second expanding into an unbearable eternity. It's not a metaphor. It's not daydreaming. It is the raw, destabilizing conviction that the world has stopped moving forward at a normal pace, and that you are trapped in a loop where minutes feel like hours, hours like days. Reality continues around you, but internally, it's as if the machinery of time has broken, and you are left suspended in its silent wreckage. This condition can be triggered by trauma, drug-induced psychosis, dissociation, or extreme anxiety. It most often appears during acute mental breakdowns or severe depersonalization episodes. The mind, unable to process the weight of its own suffering, shifts into a distorted state, where the present moment stretches endlessly, like a rubber band pulled too far and about to snap. There's no relief, no fast-forward button. Every glance at a clock is a betrayal. Time should have passed. It hasn't. For the sufferer, every breath feels too long, every sound too slow. Conversations unfold like molasses, A minute of silence can feel like drowning in stillness. Waiting becomes agony. Sleep becomes impossible. The idea of enduring even another 5 minutes feels like facing an eternity of psychological suffocation. Days blend into one another, yet nothing moves. It's like being stuck in the slow motion of a nightmare you can't wake from. Some people report watching shadows not shift, feeling the sun hang too long in the sky. Others stare at the second hand on a clock, convinced it has stopped, or that it's spinning in reverse. Thought patterns fracture. Time no longer provides structure or safety. You can't plan, because every future moment feels too distant or impossible to reach. You're stuck, forever now, in a present that won't let you go. To those on the outside, the person may appear agitated, confused, or disoriented. But the inner experience is existential torment. Because when time breaks, so does the rhythm of being human. We are creatures of time, measuring our lives by its passage. When that passage becomes a prison, there is no escape. Just the unbearable stretching of every second into something that feels like forever. Mirror touch synesthesia. Psychosis. Mirror touch synesthesia. Psychosis is the terrifying collapse of boundaries between self and other, a neurological and psychological distortion where the pain, touch, or trauma of someone else is not just seen or empathized with, but felt, physically and emotionally, in your own body. In its benign form, mirror touch synesthesia causes people to feel a light touch on their own skin when they observe someone else being touched. But when this trait spirals into psychosis, it mutates into something far darker, more invasive, and agonizingly real. Imagine watching someone get punched and feeling the blow in your own ribs hard enough to leave you winded. Imagine seeing someone cry and suddenly experiencing a crushing, inexplicable grief as if their sorrow were being downloaded into your body. You can't look away from suffering because suffering enters you. It's not sympathy. It's not compassion. It's possession. At first, it may seem like intense empathy, feeling moved by others' struggles, aching for their pain. But then it begins to consume. The brain no longer differentiates. The nervous system reacts to external pain as internal trauma. Crowds become unbearable. Hospitals feel like war zones. Watching someone limp makes your leg ache. A stranger's panic attack makes your heart race and your breath collapse. Their trauma becomes your trauma. Their wounds feel like your own. The psychosis sets in when the person can no longer tell what pain originates from them. They may start to avoid others, fearing that even casual contact or emotional proximity will flood them with unbearable sensations. Some begin to believe they are cursed. Others feel they are spiritually absorbing the world's suffering, that they are a vessel for pain that was never theirs to carry. Sleep becomes haunted by phantom injuries. Touch becomes dangerous. Compassion mutates into terror. And in the depths of this condition, the person may begin to lose their identity altogether, blurred by the constant influx of other people's sensations, emotions, and pain. Where do they end and you begin? Mirror touch synesthesia. Psychosis isn't empathy. It's psychological self-erasure. It is the horror of feeling everything, not emotionally, but viscerally, somatically, and being powerless to block it out. In a world already overwhelmed with suffering, this condition is a brutal, relentless storm that turns compassion into torment and human connection into a source of unimaginable pain. Recursive thought loops. Recursive thought loops are mental quicksand, obsessive, self-perpetuating spirals of thought that trap the mind in a closed circuit of fear, doubt, or confusion. You have a thought. It feels wrong, so you question it. That questioning becomes another thought. That thought leads to more doubt, more checking, more spiraling. And before long, you're not thinking anymore. You're circling, endlessly, silently screaming inside your own skull. This condition doesn't always look dramatic. From the outside, You may appear quiet, still, even functional. But inside, your mind is on fire. It's repeating the same sentence, the same worry, the same what if. You try to distract yourself, but the loop pulls you back in. Try to finish a task. You're stuck halfway through, replaying a scenario from 2 hours ago. Try to sleep, and your brain reboots the same obsession like a broken film reel. Recursive thought loops can emerge from anxiety, OCD, trauma, or existential dread. But regardless of origin, the mechanism is the same. Your brain won't let go. Thoughts that should be fleeting become sticky. Triggers can be microscopic. Something you said wrong, a facial expression you misread, a memory that suddenly feels dangerous. You try to reason your way out, but reason only feeds the loop. Because every answer leads to more questions. Every explanation plants a new seed of doubt. Some loops are content-based. Did I offend her? Was that dangerous? Did I lock the door? Am I a bad person? Others are abstract, philosophical, untethered from reality. What if none of this is real? What if I don't exist? What if I've already gone insane? And the more you try to escape, the tighter the loop winds, each thought reinforcing the last, each step deeper into the maze. The emotional toll is exhausting. Your mind becomes a hostile environment. You fear thinking. You fear silence. You avoid mirrors, eye contact, conversations, even solitude, because any of these might trigger the next spiral. You begin to doubt your memory, your sanity, your identity. It feels like your brain has been hijacked by your own intelligence, weaponized into a machine that won't stop asking the one question you'll never be able to answer. Recursive thought loops are not just mental noise, they are thought-made prison. And the cruelest part? You built the walls yourself, one thought at a time. Auditory verbal hallucinosis. Auditory verbal hallucinosis, AVH, is the chilling experience of hearing voices, clear, articulate, often persistent, without any external source, yet without any accompanying psychosis. The person is not delusional. They're not confused about what's real. They may even function perfectly in daily life. But somewhere, behind their eyes and between their thoughts, someone else is speaking. Unlike schizophrenia, where voices are often accompanied by paranoia or full-blown delusional beliefs, those with AVH typically retain insight. They know the voice isn't real, and yet it feels real. Painfully, unavoidably real. It can sound like a whisper over your shoulder, or like someone speaking directly into your mind. The voices might comment on your actions, echo your thoughts, or say things no one else would ever know. And sometimes, they scream. The content varies. Some voices are benign, even comforting. But others are cruel, mocking, critical, or demanding. A voice that tells you you're worthless while you're getting dressed. A whisper that says they're all watching you as you walk into a room. You know it's not real. But that doesn't matter. Your nervous system still reacts. Your heart still races. Your hands still shake. For many, it starts suddenly. After trauma, after loss, after too much stress. The mind, overwhelmed, begins to externalize inner voices, grief, guilt, shame, breaking the barrier between thought and sound. The line between your internal monologue and someone else's becomes blurred. The thoughts feel like they come from outside you, and they don't always speak kindly. AVH is especially cruel because it defies expectations. You can be perfectly sane, articulate, logical, and still haunted. It's hard to explain it to others without being dismissed, feared, or misunderstood. There's a crushing loneliness in trying to function while being silently followed by voices no one else can hear. Some learn to live with the voices. Others are tormented. Therapy can help. Medication, sometimes. But the reality remains. You are sharing your mental space with someone who isn't there, and yet is. Auditory verbal hallucinosis is not madness. It's not imagination. It is the quiet invasion of thought by sound, the eerie presence in your mind's theater that never asked for permission and never needs to raise its voice to take control. Glass delusion. Glass delusion is a forgotten, haunting psychosis, one that once swept through the minds of nobles and peasants alike in medieval and Renaissance Europe, yet still flickers in the shadows of rare psychiatric cases today. It is the deeply held belief that one's body, or parts of it, are made entirely of glass. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally, brittle, transparent, shatterable. The sufferer lives in a constant state of terror that any movement, any touch, any stumble might cause them to break into shards and cease to exist. The horror of this delusion lies in its vulnerability. Imagine waking each day convinced that your skin is paper-thin crystal, your bones hollow glass rods. You do not run. You do not laugh too hard. You don't even sit without care, fearing that the pressure of a chair might crack your hips. Some patients walk slowly, rigidly, or padded in pillows and blankets. Others isolate entirely, begging to be left alone, terrified that even love might hurt them. The fear is all-consuming. It isn't just about injury, it's about annihilation. A single misstep, a bump in the hallway, and you imagine your entire body splintering into 1,000 pieces. You don't just fear pain, you fear disintegration. And in that terror, every hug becomes a threat, every handshake a risk, every movement a gamble with your life. The most famous case was King Charles VI of France, who believed he was made of glass and would wear reinforced clothing to protect himself. He refused to let people touch him. And though centuries have passed, the modern world has not completely silenced this delusion. Echoes of it still appear in people overwhelmed by anxiety, dissociation, or severe depression. Where the metaphor of fragility becomes so intense, the mind believes it into reality. What makes glass delusion so haunting is how perfectly it reflects the internal world of those suffering from it. The belief isn't truly about glass. It's about unbearable fragility, the sense that one's self, soul, or sanity is so delicate it cannot survive even the smallest impact. It is fear of breaking, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, and of being seen in pieces no one knows how to put back together. Zero-state experience. The zero-state experience is the collapse of everything, the self, the world, time, sensation, meaning, into a void so complete, so unbearably empty, that it cannot be described as sadness, fear, or even pain. It is not a mood, it is not an emotion. It is the absence of all emotion. A psychological state so stripped of human experience that even despair becomes a luxury you no longer have access to. You are not numb. You are nothing. This state can occur in the depths of severe dissociation, catatonic depression, psychosis, or trauma-induced breakdowns. It's often reported by people who have survived near-death experiences, extreme grief, or spiritual ego death. But unlike enlightenment or transcendence, there is no awe here, no light, no wisdom. Only the raw, featureless silence of existence erased. A vacuum. You may be sitting in a room, surrounded by people, but it feels like you're floating in a space without walls or time. Your name becomes meaningless. Your memories feel like echoes from someone else's life. You cannot feel hunger. You cannot feel fear. You cannot even feel that you don't feel. There's no desire to die, but also no reason to live. You are the walking ghost of your own consciousness, trapped in a blank page that stretches forever. The terrifying part is not that the zero state hurts, it's that it doesn't. There is no pain, no narrative, no internal voice screaming for help, just the fading static of thought, the quiet disappearance of everything that once tethered you to the world. Color drains from sight. Voices become sounds without meaning. Time stops existing in any linear sense, and the very concept of you dissolves like ink in water. To those witnessing someone in this state, it can look like extreme detachment, the stillness, the blankness in the eyes, the unresponsiveness. But inside, it is not peace. It is not calm. It is a psychological blackout, existence stripped to zero. A state where nothing matters because nothing remains, not even the self that used to care. The zero state is not an experience you remember. It's an experience you emerge from, if you're lucky. And when you do, the memory is like trying to recall a dream of being nowhere. It doesn't fade. It unhappens. Because in that moment, you weren't asleep or lost. You were simply not there. Solipsistic collapse. Solipsistic collapse is an existential freefall, a psychological implosion in which a person becomes consumed by the terrifying belief that nothing exists outside their own mind. The people they love, the streets they walk, the sky above their head, it all begins to feel like a simulation, an illusion, a meticulously crafted dream that only they are conscious of. And once that thought takes root, it grows fast and mercilessly, turning reality into a prison of mirrors that reflect nothing but the self, again and again, into infinity. At first, it may begin as a philosophical itch, those quiet, unsettling questions. How do I know any of this is real? How do I know these people exist when I'm not looking at them? But then, it doesn't stop. The questions become obsessions. You start noticing the strange way time flows, how people repeat phrases, how your thoughts seem to echo in the world around you. And then, the seed bursts. What if I'm the only one here? What if this entire world is a projection of my own consciousness? What follows is panic, deep, unrelenting, and hollow. Love feels fake. Touch feels distant. Even your own memories start to feel suspicious. Conversations feel scripted. Faces feel flat. You look into your partner's eyes and wonder if there's anything behind them. You hear someone laugh, and it sounds like a soundbite on a loop. The illusion becomes too perfect to be real. You begin to search for cracks in the simulation, clues that confirm the horror your mind has started to believe. You are alone, and have always been alone. Some sufferers describe the world turning surreal, dreamlike, weightless. Others say it becomes painfully sharp, hyper-real, like a stage set under glaring lights. Either way, there is a dreadful awareness that the scaffolding of existence has been pulled away, and behind it is nothing. Just your own voice, echoing through an empty universe. This collapse of trust in reality leads to despair few can understand. How do you scream for help when the person you're screaming to might be a figment of your imagination? How do you fight for your sanity when every moment convinces you it's all just a loop of your own mind playing itself? Solipsistic collapse is not a daydream. It's not philosophy. It's a psychological exile from connection, meaning, and presence. It is drowning in your own mind, surrounded by shadows that look like people, and never being sure if anyone is actually there. Mind ownership. Crisis. Mind ownership crisis is a psychological rupture so intimate and invasive that it unravels the most basic truth we cling to, that our thoughts are ours. In this deeply unsettling state, the mind turns against itself, whispering doubts not just about what you're thinking, but who is doing the thinking. You no longer trust the voice in your head. You no longer feel it belongs to you. Every thought, every inner word, becomes suspect, like it's being broadcast from somewhere else, channeled through you, but not by you. This condition often appears in schizophrenia, severe dissociation, or trauma-induced psychosis. It manifests as thought insertion, thought broadcasting, or thought control, where individuals believe their inner monologue is being manipulated, monitored, or generated by someone, or something, else. The terror doesn't come from hearing voices. It comes from hearing your own voice and no longer believing it's yours. You might think, I want to go outside, and immediately recoil, wondering who made that thought appear. Was it planted? Was it watched? You begin to second-guess every mental impulse. You may feel like a puppet, animated by foreign strings, ideas dropped into your mind by unseen hands. Some sufferers describe it as mental trespassing. Others say it feels like being possessed by an invisible author, rewriting the script of your inner life in real time. This crisis of ownership corrodes identity at its root. Because who are we, if not the ones steering our thoughts? If you can't trust your own mind, then the entire scaffolding of reality starts to tremble. You may retreat from people, fearing your thoughts can be heard. You may lash out at external forces you believe are intruding, government signals, spirits, artificial intelligence, a god. The explanations grow surreal because the fear is so real. There is a profound loneliness in this experience. It's not just isolation from others, it's estrangement from the self. You're trapped in your own skull with something that sounds like you, speaks like you, but feels alien, not evil, not violent, just not you. Like a stranger whispering from behind your eyes, wearing your voice as a mask. Mind ownership. Crisis is the disintegration of mental sovereignty. A haunting sense that your consciousness is no longer yours to command, and your thoughts are merely visitors passing through a home that used to belong to you. Self-replication. Delusion. Self-replication. Delusion is a disorienting, surreal psychosis where the boundaries of the self begin to dissolve, and the terrifying belief emerges that you are splitting, duplicating, or multiplying into several versions of yourself. It is not a metaphor for feeling fragmented or emotionally torn. It is a deeply held conviction that there are multiple yous, each existing simultaneously, each wandering the world, acting, speaking, and living in ways outside your control. At first, it might feel like a simple dissociation, a sense that you've left your body or are watching yourself from outside. But then the fear creeps in. You see someone in the street and become convinced they are you. You might catch a glimpse of your reflection and feel as though it's a different version of yourself. You may feel like parts of your consciousness are detaching, forming independent entities. Some sufferers believe they've created dozens of copies, clones, shadows, echoes, some of whom are replacing them, stealing their identity, or ruining their life while wearing their face. To the outside world, it can seem like classic delusion or identity confusion, but inside the sufferer's mind, it's nothing short of a horror show. They may become obsessed with tracking their copies, terrified that these other selves are out in the world making decisions they didn't authorize, betraying their relationships, committing crimes, or even living more authentically than the real self ever could. Some attempt to confront their doubles. Others try to destroy them through self-harm, withdrawal, or suicide attempts, not to end their life, but to stop the replication. This delusion is often seen in schizophrenia, severe dissociative disorders, or following intense trauma. It reflects the breakdown of identity at its most terrifying level, not just not knowing who you are, but believing that too many versions of you exist and that your identity has spiraled out of your control. You are not losing yourself. You are multiplying into something alien. Self-replication. Delusion isn't about ego, it's about invasion by your own self. A surreal battle between you and your reflections, each more unfamiliar than the last. You become both the victim and the intruder, hunted by the many versions of you that shouldn't exist, but somehow do. Chronic derealization. Chronic derealization is the psychological equivalent of watching your life through a thick pane of glass. Present, but untouchable. It's a persistent and haunting feeling that the world around you is not real. The streets look the same. The people speak the same. But everything feels off, hollow, surreal, like a movie set you've been dropped into, or a dream that refuses to end. You're not confused. You're aware that something's wrong. And that awareness is the most terrifying part of all. This isn't fleeting dissociation. This is a condition that can stretch for weeks, months, or even years. The ground beneath your feet may feel artificial. The faces of your loved ones may seem unfamiliar, like masks. The sky might look too still, the lights too bright, the voices too flat. It's not hallucination. You see everything. But you don't believe in it. The world has lost its texture, its emotional weight. You feel like you're floating behind a screen, untethered, invisible, and profoundly disconnected. In chronic cases, this detachment becomes constant. You may go through the motions of life, eating, working, smiling, while internally screaming that none of it feels real. It's not depression, though they often coexist. It's not anxiety, though it can be triggered by it. It's disintegration, a fundamental fracture in your sense of existence. You begin to doubt whether the people you talk to are truly there, whether the place you woke up in is truly where you belong, whether the world itself hasn't already ended, and no one told you. Many sufferers describe it as living in a simulation or a dream they can't wake up from. Time loses its meaning. Objects feel unfamiliar. Even your own body can feel robotic or distant. You may look at your hands and feel like they belong to someone else. Some begin to wonder if they're dead and stuck in some afterlife purgatory. Others fear they're losing their mind. But the most terrifying thing is, you're not. You're lucid. You know it's happening. And that insight becomes its own prison. Chronic derealization is not just a symptom. It is an existential haunting. A quiet, unrelenting terror that reality has cracked beneath your feet and no one else can see it. You smile, nod, carry on. But inside, you're still waiting for the world to feel real again, for life to click back into place. And it never does. Hyperawareness syndrome. Hyperawareness syndrome is a psychological torment disguised as attention, an unrelenting, obsessive focus on the most basic functions of being human: breathing, blinking, swallowing, moving your tongue. The very things that are supposed to operate on autopilot suddenly rise to the surface of consciousness and refuse to go back. You become too aware, so aware that these ordinary actions no longer feel automatic. They feel manual, forced. And with that awareness comes panic. It often begins with a stray thought: I can feel myself blinking. Or, what if I forget how to swallow? The mind, once curious, turns vigilant. It locks onto the process and refuses to let go. You feel every inhale, every exhale. You can't stop monitoring it. And the more you try to ignore it, the louder it becomes. You're no longer just living. You're manually piloting a body that feels like it could break down at any moment if you lose focus for even a second. This syndrome, often linked to anxiety disorders and obsessive-compulsive tendencies, creates a feedback loop that amplifies distress. The awareness causes panic, and the panic intensifies the awareness. Soon, the sufferer can't go a moment without thinking, am I doing this right? What if I stop? What if my body forgets how to breathe, or swallow, or blink unless I make it happen? Daily life becomes exhausting. Conversations are interrupted by your own breath. Moments of calm are ruined by the feeling of saliva building in your mouth. Even sleep becomes terrifying. How do you stop thinking about breathing long enough to fall unconscious? You can't escape your body. You are the body. And suddenly that feels like a prison, one you have to control constantly, or risk it turning against you. Others often don't understand. They say, just don't think about it. But it's like being told not to think of a drowning sensation while your lungs fill with air you now notice too much. It's not just annoying, it's terrifying and isolating. Because you can't explain why the act of blinking, is making you feel like you're losing your mind. Hyperawareness syndrome is the horror of consciousness turned inward. It is the trap of noticing too much, too often, and being unable to turn the lights off in your own mind. It's the most human of processes transformed into a never-ending psychological alarm you cannot silence. Amnesia of identity. Amnesia of identity is not simply forgetting your name, it is forgetting your existence. It is the sudden and disorienting collapse of your self-image, a complete disconnection from the person you once were. You wake up somewhere, on a bench, in a hospital, on your own floor, and everything feels eerily familiar and horrifyingly blank. You don't know your name. You don't know your past. You don't recognize your reflection. You are conscious, alert, functioning, but the story that defines you has vanished. This condition, often triggered by psychological trauma or extreme emotional stress, is the mind's desperate act of protection. Instead of processing the unbearable, it severs the thread connecting the self to its history. The person remains alive, but the identity has been erased, wiped away like a chalk drawing in a storm. In that first moment of realization, there is a silence that screams. You search for clues in your surroundings, the clothes on your body, the objects in your pocket, the language you speak. Every detail is a question. Every mirror is a stranger. You don't just forget facts, you forget belonging. You forget meaning. And in the absence of a past, the present becomes unlivable. How do you know who to trust? What to fear? What you love or hate? Even emotions become unmoored, floating without context, without source. Some people adopt new names, build temporary identities, start again with childlike curiosity, until the weight of the void catches up. Others spiral into panic, desperate to find someone, anyone, who can reflect their identity back to them. But even when someone steps forward, "I know you. You're my sister," it doesn't always click, because facts don't equal feeling. You can be told who you are, shown photos, documents, proof. But without the emotional anchor, it all feels like fiction. The most tragic part? Sometimes, the original identity never returns. Sometimes it comes back in fragments, flickers, unbearable bursts of memory. And when it does, it's often tangled with the trauma that caused the collapse to begin with. Amnesia of identity is not a blank slate. It is a quiet scream from the soul, a deep psychological exile from the only story you ever truly owned, yourself. And until that story is found again, you live as a shadow of someone you cannot remember, waiting for the spark of memory to ignite and lead you home. Syndrome of subjective doubt. Syndrome of subjective doubt is a torment of the mind that doesn't scream. It asks. Over and over, it whispers, "Are you sure?" It is a condition where no decision ever feels final, no belief ever feels firm, no memory ever feels trustworthy. The person suffering from it becomes trapped in a cruel feedback loop of uncertainty, paralyzed not by fear of consequences, but by the terrifying conviction that they cannot trust their own judgment, no matter how small the decision may be. You choose a word, then doubt it. You lock the door, then question whether you really did. You send a message, then spiral into hours of wondering if it was the right tone, the right time, the right person. Every action is shadowed by a second guess, and every second guess is followed by another. It is endless, exhausting, demeaning. Your mind becomes a courtroom with no verdict, only a jury that never stops deliberating. This syndrome often exists at the intersection of anxiety, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and depersonalization. But it can also emerge from trauma or high-pressure environments where one's sense of control is constantly undermined. The result is an emotional erosion that leaves the person unanchored. Not because they lack intelligence, or awareness, or care, but because their brain no longer grants them the peace of closure. The self-doubt becomes compulsive. Did you offend that person? Did you misread that expression? Did you actually lock the door, or just think you did? The uncertainty doesn't fade with reassurance. It only feeds off it, because even the reassurance feels untrustworthy. You check again, and again, and again. People with this syndrome may appear indecisive, distracted, insecure. But what's happening inside is far more harrowing. They are fighting a war with a mind that no longer believes in its own reality. Confidence doesn't exist, only mental echoes bouncing through corridors of what-ifs and maybe-nots. Syndrome of subjective doubt is not hesitation. It's imprisonment. It turns every choice into a maze, every answer into another question. And in the quiet spaces where peace should live, there is only the whisper, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure?" Thought withdrawal. Thought withdrawal is a deeply disturbing and intrusive delusion where the mind no longer feels like a private space. It feels like a breached vault. The sufferer becomes convinced, with terrifying certainty, that thoughts are not only no longer their own, but that they are actively being taken from them. As if someone, or something, is reaching into their brain and stealing ideas, memories, inner dialogue. It's not simply a matter of forgetfulness. It's extraction. Silent. Precise. Violating. This condition is most commonly seen in schizophrenia and severe psychotic episodes. The person may suddenly pause mid-sentence and feel that the rest of the thought was removed before they could speak it. They may attempt to concentrate and find the thought vanishing just as it forms. But it's not a cognitive error to them, it is sabotage. They feel intellectually robbed, stripped of control, invaded from within. The sense of violation goes far beyond confusion. It feels like psychic theft. The mind, once a sanctuary of private thinking, becomes porous, vulnerable. Some describe the experience as if an invisible hand were plucking ideas directly out of their skull. Others believe their thoughts are being read or monitored by machines, aliens, government agencies, or supernatural entities. It doesn't matter how impossible it sounds. The terror is real. Their very self feels under attack. What makes thought withdrawal so horrifying is that the victim remains fully aware of the gap. They feel the absence like an amputated limb. They know something was just there, a word, an insight, a decision, and now it's gone, midstream, like a breath stolen from their lungs. The fear grows into obsession. They begin to guard their thoughts, speak less, avoid certain topics, even wear coverings over their heads or line their rooms with foil, convinced they are shielding themselves from mental intruders. To those around them, it often appears as confusion or awkward silence, but inside, it is chaos. The narrative of their inner life is being shredded in real time. They are left with fragments and silences where meaning used to be. Thought withdrawal is the collapse of mental autonomy. It is the horrifying sense that your own mind is not safe, not private, not even truly yours. It is a psychological robbery, one that leaves no evidence, only emptiness. Delusional misidentification syndrome. Delusional misidentification syndrome is a fracturing of trust so deep, so surreal, that the very identities of those around you begin to blur, shift, and splinter. It is a psychological nightmare in which the people closest to you, your spouse, your parent, your friend, are no longer who they appear to be. They look the same, they act the same, but something feels impossibly wrong. And your mind, unable to reconcile that subtle dissonance, begins rewriting reality to make sense of it. The result is paranoia masquerading as logic, love twisted by suspicion, and a world where no face can truly be trusted. There are several variants of this syndrome, each more unsettling than the last. In Capgras delusion, the sufferer becomes convinced that someone they love has been replaced by an identical imposter. In Frigoli delusion, they believe that different people are actually one single person in disguise. In intermetamorphosis, the terrifying belief arises that one person has literally transformed into another. And in all of them, the truth is felt more deeply than it is thought. The gut says this is not who you think it is, and no amount of evidence can convince it otherwise. The emotional impact is catastrophic. A mother may no longer recognize her daughter as her own. A husband may accuse his wife of being a government agent in disguise. Friends become strangers. Strangers become threats. The familiar becomes an elaborate trick. And all the while, the sufferer remains trapped in a waking dream where everyone wears the wrong name. These delusions often emerge in the context of schizophrenia, dementia, or severe brain injury, particularly when the brain's facial recognition and emotional processing centers become disconnected. The result is a face that's recognized visually, but not emotionally. The eyes say, "I know this person." The heart says, "I feel nothing." And from that painful mismatch, the mind spirals into fiction. To live in this state is to be surrounded by people who insist they love you, while you believe, truly believe, that they are lying, or worse, pretending. It is the death of intimacy through the distortion of identity, a quiet, slow-burning horror in which the world doesn't vanish, but becomes warped, like a mirror just slightly off, distorted enough to convince you that you're surrounded not by loved ones, but by strangers wearing their faces. Somatic hyperawareness. Somatic hyperawareness is a suffocating fixation on the inner workings of the body, a relentless, obsessive attention to sensations that most people never notice. To the sufferer, every heartbeat becomes a thunderclap. Every breath feels mechanical and labored. Every stomach gurgle, pulse, or muscle twitch becomes the center of attention, magnified 1,000 times over until it eclipses the rest of reality. The body, instead of being a silent companion, becomes a screaming presence, always noticed, always demanding, never at peace. This condition often emerges in anxiety disorders, health-related OCD, or after medical trauma. But once it takes hold, it consumes everything. You become hyper-aware of blinking, of swallowing, of the sensation of your tongue in your mouth, the way your chest rises when you inhale, the pressure in your throat, the beating in your temple. What should be unconscious becomes conscious. What should fade into the background of daily life becomes a blinding spotlight of obsession. Imagine being unable to stop noticing your breathing. Every inhale feels wrong. Every exhale feels strained. And the more you focus on it, the worse it gets. You try to distract yourself, but your brain keeps circling back. Am I breathing too fast? Too slow? Is something wrong? You can't sleep, can't concentrate, can't speak without the awareness slamming back into you, reminding you that your body is always there, doing things, and you can't shut it off. The terror comes not just from the sensations, but from the perceived loss of control. The body becomes an unpredictable machine, and every small change is interpreted as a potential sign of disease, death, or permanent malfunction. Rational reassurance means nothing when the feeling screams louder than facts. Doctors say nothing is wrong, but your brain insists something must be. For many, this becomes a vicious cycle. Fear increases awareness, and awareness fuels more fear. The more you try to ignore it, the louder it becomes. The more you search for relief, the more trapped you feel. It is a body turned traitor, a self turned against itself. And the worst part? No one else can see it. You look fine, you function. But inside, you are spiraling in the echo chamber of your own skin, begging for silence, for stillness, for a moment when your body stops feeling like a prison with the lights always on. Existential OCD. Existential OCD is not fear of death. It's not philosophical curiosity. It's a relentless, soul-grinding obsession with the nature of reality, meaning, and consciousness that spirals into torment. It's the voice in your head that doesn't ask the big questions. It won't stop asking them. Over and over, louder, deeper, darker, until what began as thought becomes prison. Who am I? What am I? What if none of this is real? What if I'm dreaming? What if I don't have free will? What if I don't exist? Unlike ordinary existential pondering, existential OCD is driven by compulsive doubt and the unbearable craving for certainty in questions that have no answers. The mind fixates on unresolvable ideas. What if I'm in a simulation? What if other people aren't real? What if I'm the only conscious being in the universe and everything else is a projection? These thoughts are not fleeting. They loop. They suffocate. They drown out reality and reduce every experience to a trial of uncertainty. The terror isn't in the question. It's in the lack of resolution. The inability to feel like the answer you know rationally is the answer emotionally. You can tell yourself, "Of course I'm real." But your brain says, "But what if you're not?" And then it demands you solve it, now, perfectly, permanently. And when you can't, it punishes you with anxiety so deep it feels like madness. Sufferers may fall into compulsive rituals to cope, Googling philosophy late into the night, checking how others feel real, seeking reassurance from loved ones, watching their reflection to prove they exist, or dissecting memories to test their authenticity. But every attempt at reassurance backfires, feeding the cycle. Because the relief never sticks. It never lasts. This isn't curiosity. It's psychological torment. A void carved by doubt where your sense of self used to live. It isolates you, not just from others, but from yourself. From your own thoughts. From your ability to trust the ground beneath your feet, the time on the clock, the love you feel. It whispers that maybe nothing matters, that maybe nothing is even there. Existential OCD isn't about wondering. It's about needing an answer to a question the universe refuses to answer, and being unable to live until you get one. Imposter syndrome spiral. The imposter syndrome spiral is a quiet psychological implosion, a gnawing, echoing belief that you are a fraud, a pretender, a lucky accident who's fooled everyone and is just waiting to be exposed. It starts as doubt, a skipped beat of confidence, a moment of hesitation. But then it grows. One internal whisper turns into a chorus. You don't deserve this. You're not good enough. They'll find out. And the higher you rise, academically, professionally, socially, the louder it gets. Unlike occasional self-doubt, this spiral is relentless and recursive. Every success is dismissed. Every compliment is reinterpreted as pity or manipulation. Every failure, no matter how small, feels like proof that the mask is slipping. The mind rewrites its history, flattening hard work into flukes, effort into luck, perseverance into trickery. You didn't earn this. You fooled them. It's only a matter of time. People with imposter syndrome often appear high-achieving, articulate, admired, even envied. But internally, they live in constant fear of being found out. They over-prepare. They overperform. And yet, no amount of success is ever enough to silence the fear. Because the more they accomplish, the more there is to lose. The pedestal becomes a trap. The spiral intensifies with comparison. One glance at a colleague's confidence, one post on social media, one missed opportunity, and the internal narrative tightens. They know what they're doing. You're pretending. You don't belong here. Imposter syndrome doesn't just question competence, it attacks identity. It doesn't say you failed at something. It says you are a failure wearing a stolen costume of competence. Over time, this chronic self-suspicion erodes everything: creativity, joy, ambition. You stop applying for opportunities. You avoid recognition. You procrastinate, not from laziness, but from fear of confirming your worst suspicion, that you're not good enough. And yet you hide it, because admitting to it might confirm the very fraud you feel you are. This is the spiral, each loop reinforcing the last. Self-doubt becomes self-sabotage, and self-sabotage becomes more evidence of fraudulence. The imposter syndrome. Spiral doesn't shout. It whispers every day, with a voice that sounds like your own. And the more you listen, the more it convinces you that you've fooled the world, when in truth, it's only your mind that's fooled you. Personality fragmentation. Personality fragmentation is a haunting fracture of identity, a psychological splintering in which the self divides into separate, often conflicting parts, each with its own voice, its own needs, its own history. It is not theatrical. It is not chosen. It is the mind breaking apart under unbearable pressure, carving itself into pieces to survive what it could not face whole. Some parts are angry, some are numb, some are protectors, others are wounded children. And all of them are you, and not you. This fragmentation often forms in response to chronic, overwhelming trauma, especially in childhood, when the brain, too young and too vulnerable, finds dissociation as its only weapon. Instead of feeling everything at once, the mind compartmentalizes. Lock the rage here. Bury the fear there. Hide the grief in a corner so dark it forgets how to speak. But over time, these compartments become walls. And behind each wall, something grows. People experiencing personality fragmentation may not notice it at first. They might feel distant, inconsistent, or emotionally unpredictable. But soon, there are gaps in memory, in behavior, in voice. They may find themselves reacting in ways that feel foreign, watching themselves from a distance, as if someone else is making the decisions. A soft-spoken person may suddenly snap in rage. A confident adult may regress into helplessness. It's not an act, it's a switch. And behind each switch is a part of the self that stepped forward, uninvited but necessary. This is not the same as full dissociative identity disorder, though the lines can blur. In personality fragmentation, the shifts may be subtle: emotional whiplash, contradictions in desires, thoughts that feel like echoes from someone else. The sufferer often knows something is wrong, but can't quite explain what. They are haunted not by hallucinations, but by pieces of themselves that emerge in shadows and speak with voices they don't always recognize. The real pain lies in the silence. These fragments rarely shout. They linger at the edges, in nightmares, in intrusive thoughts, in the sudden feeling of being a child again in the middle of a meeting, in the inexplicable panic during moments that should feel safe. Personality fragmentation is the mind's attempt at salvation through division, a strategy born from trauma, where survival meant breaking the self into smaller, quieter pieces. And long after the danger has passed, those pieces remain, whispering, remembering, waiting to be seen, not as threats, but as the unfinished chapters of a story the world was never ready to hear. Intrusive harm obsessions. Intrusive harm obsessions are some of the most horrifying thoughts a human mind can produce, not because they reflect who you are, but because they feel like the exact opposite. These are sudden, graphic, and unwanted mental images or impulses involving violence. Hurting a loved one, pushing someone into traffic, stabbing yourself, smothering a child. They erupt into your consciousness like mental landmines, uninvited and utterly repulsive. And the worst part is, you don't want them. You hate them. But they keep coming back. This condition often appears in people with obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, especially the subtype known as pure O, where compulsions are mostly internal and invisible. A person might be holding a baby and suddenly imagine throwing them across the room, or be cutting vegetables and picture stabbing their partner. The thought arrives like a lightning strike, so vivid, so specific, so wrong, that it sends them spiraling into panic, shame, and self-loathing. They don't act on these thoughts. In fact, the very existence of the thought horrifies them. That horror becomes the obsession. Why did I think that? Am I dangerous? What if I snap? What if I secretly want this? And thus begins the internal war. Endless mental checking, self-monitoring, avoidance, rumination. They may stop holding sharp objects, refuse to be alone with children, or isolate themselves out of fear that they can't trust their own mind. What makes intrusive harm obsessions so devastating is that the more you resist them, the more power they gain. The brain begins to fear its own thoughts, and that fear reinforces their presence. Every attempt to push them away becomes a signal that they're important, dangerous, real. And so the cycle deepens. To outsiders, the person looks fine. They might even be the kindest, gentlest soul in the room. But inside, they are constantly policing their own mind, living in a private hell where every thought feels like a potential crime. They don't need punishment. They need relief. They don't need to be told they'd never do it. They know deep down. But the doubt feels louder. Intrusive harm. Obsessions aren't signs of violence. They are signs of fear. They are the mind's cruel trick, creating the most terrifying thoughts imaginable and then punishing you for having them. They are not who you are. They are what you're most afraid you could be, and that's what makes them hurt so much. Sensorimotor OCD. Sensorimotor OCD is a silent, agonizing trap where the most basic, automatic functions of the human body, breathing, blinking, swallowing, heartbeat, suddenly become conscious, intrusive, and unbearably loud. It is the moment the mind notices, and then cannot stop noticing, the mechanical rhythms of the body. And what should be effortless becomes torment. You're not simply breathing. You're watching yourself breathe, counting every inhale, measuring every blink, drowning in every swallow, trapped in the prison of your own awareness. This form of obsessive-compulsive disorder doesn't scream with fear or wash hands until they bleed. It whispers, subtly at first. Are you blinking too much? Are you breathing the right way? Did you just swallow wrong? These thoughts seem harmless, until they repeat, until they embed, until you can't focus on anything else because your entire consciousness is being hijacked by a process you used to do without thinking. And that's the horror. Once you notice, you can't unnotice. The brain locks on. What should be background noise becomes center stage. You sit in meetings thinking about your eyes. You lay in bed fixating on your chest, rising and falling. Every gulp feels too loud, too forced, too deliberate. The compulsion is not action, it's attention. The mind becomes obsessed with monitoring itself. The anxiety grows. You try distraction, you try relaxation, but the harder you try not to think about blinking, the more you blink. You feel like a puppet tugging its own strings with no escape. You may start to fear that you'll never stop noticing, that your entire life will be reduced to this constant surveillance of your own body. And that fear feeds the cycle, amplifying the awareness, until blinking becomes unbearable. Breathing becomes a chore. Swallowing feels like drowning. People rarely understand it. Just stop thinking about it, they say. But that's like telling someone not to fall while they're already slipping. You smile, nod, try to act normal, but your internal world is collapsing under the weight of your own biology. Sensorimotor OCD turns the very act of being alive into an obsession. It strips the unconscious grace of bodily rhythm and replaces it with scrutiny, fear, and endless, exhausting attention. You don't want to breathe anymore. You want to forget that you have to. Psychic numbing. Psychic numbing is the silent aftermath of trauma, a chilling emotional shutdown where the ability to feel disappears, not in bursts, but in a slow, unrelenting fade. It's not sadness. It's not depression. It is emptiness, absolute and anesthetic. A mental frostbite that deadens everything from the inside out, until joy, fear, love, even grief, all become hollow echoes, unreachable and unreal. This condition often occurs in people suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, complex trauma, or prolonged emotional abuse. It is the mind's last resort when pain becomes too overwhelming to process. Instead of breaking, the psyche builds a wall, thick, high, impenetrable. At first, it's a survival mechanism. You don't cry, you don't panic, you function. But slowly, you begin to realize the wall hasn't just blocked the pain, it's blocked everything. People with psychic numbing describe a strange, aching distance between themselves and the world. They can watch their child smile and feel nothing. They can hear tragic news and remain unmoved. Relationships begin to decay, not out of anger, but absence. Friends say, "You've changed." But you haven't changed. You've gone still. Inside, you know how you should feel. You remember emotions like memories of a song you once loved. But the music doesn't play anymore. You smile because you're supposed to. You laugh when it's expected. But it's mimicry. Performance. The soul is disconnected from the surface. Often, guilt follows. Guilt for not crying at a funeral. Guilt for feeling cold when you should feel warmth. You start to ask yourself, am I broken? Have I become heartless? But this isn't heartlessness. It's the result of too much pain, not too little. The mind has numbed itself not out of apathy, but out of exhaustion. It couldn't survive if it kept feeling everything. The tragedy of psychic numbing is its invisibility. No one sees the absence. No one hears the silence. The world moves on, unaware that inside you, everything has frozen. You're still standing, still breathing. But you're not living, not really. You're watching life through frosted glass, hoping that someday the warmth will return, and you'll feel again what you've had to forget just to survive. Memory contamination. Memory contamination is the slow, terrifying erosion of truth within your own mind. The merging of real and false memories until you can no longer tell them apart. It is not just forgetfulness. It is betrayal. You remember the moment clearly, what someone said, how it felt, the sound in the room, the look on their face. But one day, something contradicts it. A photo, another person's version, a new piece of information, and suddenly, the memory shatters. Or worse, it shifts, twisting into something unrecognizable. You don't know which version is real. And worse, you don't know if any of it ever was. This psychological distortion can be born from trauma, suggestion, sleep deprivation, mental illness, or even everyday experiences where the brain attempts to fill in missing pieces. But when it becomes chronic, obsessive, or emotionally destabilizing, it becomes a waking nightmare, an identity built on sand. You start questioning the most personal parts of your past. Did that person really hurt me? Or did I exaggerate it over time? Did I really say those words? Or did I just imagine the conversation so vividly that it became part of my story? Did I invent a feeling to survive a moment I couldn't cope with? Or worse, did someone give me that memory, plant it by accident through repetition, or by design? The worst part is that your emotional reactions don't change. Even if you suspect a memory is false, the feeling stays. The betrayal, the shame, the joy, the rage. You cry over events you now doubt ever occurred. You mourn a loss that may have never happened. You feel guilt over choices you might not have even made. Your mind becomes unreliable, a traitor with a kind face whispering, "Yes, this happened." Or, maybe it didn't. Relationships suffer. You second-guess arguments, apologies, even entire friendships. Did they really say that to me? Or did I rewrite it? Can I trust them? Or is it my brain that can't be trusted? Memory contamination is the psychological collapse of certainty. It turns your past into a kaleidoscope, always shifting, always unstable. And when you can't trust your memories, you begin to question your reality, your relationships, yourself. Because if your own mind is lying to you, what else might be false? Emotional dyschronometria. Emotional dyschronometria is a haunting disruption in the timeline of the self, a condition where emotions become unanchored from the events that caused them, leaving a person flooded with intense feelings that have no clear origin. You're hit with sorrow, rage, joy, fear, or longing, but can't trace the moment, the memory, the why. It's not just confusion, it's emotional disorientation, like your mind is playing back old feelings on shuffle without context, and you're left grasping for meaning in a storm you can't see coming. People with emotional dyschronometria may suddenly feel deep grief while washing dishes, or an overwhelming fear while walking down a quiet street. The emotional energy is real, powerful, often physically felt, but the cause is missing, erased, or hidden behind the fog of memory. It's as though your heart is reacting to something your mind hasn't caught up to, or no longer remembers at all. It leaves you unmoored, constantly wondering, why am I feeling this? What did I forget? What is my body trying to tell me that I can't see? This condition can emerge after trauma, dissociation, or neurocognitive disruptions like brain injury or degenerative disease. But even in high-functioning people, it can quietly unravel the ability to trust one's emotional responses. Emotions no longer act like signals pointing to the present. They become ghosts from a broken past, drifting in uninvited and unexplained. A breakup from 5 years ago may hit like it just happened. A childhood fear may surface during a routine phone call. Joy may come with the intensity of nostalgia, but without a memory to accompany it. It feels like being haunted by echoes that never introduce themselves. Over time, this fracture between feeling and knowing breeds anxiety, shame, and exhaustion. You begin to fear your own emotions, not because they're too much, but because they're untethered. You start questioning every mood. You stop trusting your instincts. How can you respond to life authentically when your body feels things your mind can't place? Emotional dyschronometria turns the heart into a time traveler trapped in the wrong decade. You smile at the wrong moment. You cry in places that make no sense. And behind every surge of emotion is the same aching question. Where is this coming from? And why now? Cognitive flooding. Cognitive flooding is the mental equivalent of a dam bursting, an overwhelming, uncontrollable surge of thoughts crashing into your consciousness all at once, leaving no space to think, breathe, or be. It's not overthinking. It's not worrying. It's drowning. Thoughts don't come in a line. They come in a torrent, simultaneous, overlapping, screaming over one another like 100 radios blasting at once, each with a different channel, a different voice, a different urgency. One thought says, you forgot to send the email. Another reminds you of something cruel you said 10 years ago. A third one flashes the image of your own death. A fourth is wondering if you locked the door. A fifth is replaying a sound you heard earlier. A sixth wants to know what happens when you die. A seventh just repeats the word failure over and over. There's no silence, no pause. The brain has lost its filter. What should be background noise becomes front and center. Memories, fears, intrusive images, abstract questions, sensations, numbers, song lyrics, all flood in, uninvited and unstoppable. You can't grab onto any one thought. You can't finish a sentence before 10 more barge in. Focus collapses. Functioning becomes impossible. You try to think your way out, but every attempt pulls you deeper in. Because even your attempt to calm down becomes another thought in the crowd. This experience can happen during panic attacks, manic episodes, severe anxiety, PTSD flashbacks, or psychosis. But it can also strike people in moments of high stress or sensory overload. It feels like a hijacking, your mind no longer responding to you, no longer taking orders, just running, racing, spinning like a machine with the brakes cut and no one behind the wheel. You try grounding techniques, breathing, anything, but nothing quiets the chaos. There's no one thought to confront, no one fear to soothe. Just all of them, all at once, crashing and bleeding into one another like a mental whiteout. Cognitive flooding doesn't just hurt, it terrifies. Because in the flood, you lose control. You lose focus. You lose your ability to think like yourself. And in that moment, you wonder if your mind will ever go quiet again, or if this is the new normal. A life lived under the weight of your own thoughts, screaming to be heard in a room with no exit. Dream reality confusion. Dream reality. Confusion is a destabilizing collapse in the boundary between waking life and the dream world, a psychological disorientation in which the mind cannot reliably distinguish between what was dreamed and what was lived. You remember conversations, events, even entire days, but a creeping uncertainty sets in. Did that actually happen? Or did I dream it? And as that doubt deepens, so does the fear that reality itself might be slipping away. At first, it's subtle. You recall a moment with vivid clarity, something someone said, something you felt, and then someone tells you, that never happened. You laugh it off. Maybe you misremembered. But then it happens again, and again. You begin waking up from dreams that feel more real than your waking life, so textured, so emotionally charged that you carry them like memories. A friend betrays you in a dream, and you feel the hurt all day. You argue with someone in your mind, only to later struggle to remember whether it took place in the physical world. The timeline begins to blur. This confusion can emerge from sleep disorders, trauma, dissociative conditions, or psychedelic experiences, but it can also follow periods of intense stress or emotional upheaval. The brain, flooded and fatigued, begins to weave together threads from both realms, and the mind's natural sorting mechanism, what's real, what's imagined, starts to fray. You may find yourself questioning if you've actually spoken to someone about something, or if that conversation was a vivid mental construct. You may wake up feeling exhausted, not because you didn't sleep, but because your dream was too busy, too long, too intense to feel like rest. And in the worst cases, you may begin to distrust your own experiences. Was that real joy, real pain, or just a leftover echo from your sleeping mind? The terrifying consequence is that reality loses its anchor. If you can't tell what's real, how do you trust your choices, your memories, your relationships? And worse, if waking life feels like a dream, does anything matter at all? Dream reality. Confusion is a psychological vertigo where your past becomes a blur, your present feels unstable, and the very fabric of your identity begins to ripple like a half-remembered dream. You wake, but never feel fully awake. Semantic saturation. Semantic saturation is a bizarre and deeply unsettling phenomenon where language collapses under its own weight. It happens when a word is repeated so many times in a short period that it starts to lose all meaning, turning from a familiar sound into something alien, hollow, nonsensical. You say the word door over and over, and suddenly it becomes strange, ugly, foreign. It doesn't mean door anymore. It's just noise. While this can happen to anyone in passing, in heightened states of anxiety, dissociation, or obsessive thought loops, semantic saturation can spiral into something far more distressing. Words break down not just in sound, but in concept. You stare at the word love, home, or even your own name, and it no longer feels connected to anything real. The letters look wrong. The sound echoes. It becomes nonsense. And with it, so does the meaning it once held. This experience can lead to a frightening detachment from reality. Because language is how we make sense of the world, and when that language glitches, so does everything it describes. You may feel like the floor beneath your feet no longer exists in words, that objects lose their labels, that emotions can't be named. It's not just forgetfulness, it's cognitive disintegration. Some sufferers become obsessed with the feeling, unable to stop repeating words just to test if they still work. Others retreat from speaking entirely, afraid that all meaning is illusion. This state can make even the most fundamental concepts feel slippery, like language is a trick your brain plays to convince you things are stable when, in truth, they aren't. Semantic saturation is the terrifying realization that meaning is not inherent. It's assigned. And when your mind stops assigning it, when the word becomes noise and the thought behind it fades, you're left with an eerie silence, a rupture between sound and sense, a moment where you don't just forget what a word means, you forget what it means to mean anything at all. Nihilistic panic. Nihilistic panic is not the quiet, philosophical musing that life may be meaningless. It is a full-body, soul-level collapse triggered by that realization. It is the moment your mind looks into the void of existence and doesn't just wonder what's there, it falls in. It starts as a thought. What if nothing matters? Then it expands. What if love doesn't mean anything? What if all of this is a game? What if the universe is empty and I am alone inside it? And with each question, the ground beneath you begins to disintegrate. It feels like existential vertigo. Your body reacts as if it's in danger. Your chest tightens, your heart races, your limbs go numb, not because of something chasing you, but because your mind has turned on itself. You are flooded with adrenaline over an idea, a belief, a sudden, horrific certainty that everything, your work, your relationships, your memories, your entire life, might be nothing more than dust pretending to be purpose. People describe it as a sense of psychic drowning, a scream that has no source, a sharp drop into a pit of mental darkness where even hope feels ridiculous. You try to hold on to something, faith, love, even suffering, but everything slips through your fingers. And the worst part? You can't tell anyone. Not really. Because how do you explain that you're terrified not of dying, not of pain, but of the possibility that everything you've ever cared about might be pointless? This panic is not depression, though it often coexists with it. It's not apathy. It's the violent, panicked rejection of apathy. The mind is begging to find meaning, to believe in something, but the more it looks, the more it finds silence. The stars don't answer. The sky doesn't care. God might not be listening, and in that moment, the silence becomes unbearable. Nihilistic panic is not calm detachment. It's not spiritual transcendence. It is a mental implosion, a psychological freefall where existence itself feels like a joke, and the punchline is you. You're not just afraid of dying. You're afraid of living in a reality where nothing ever really mattered. And once that thought takes root, it spreads like wildfire, consuming every anchor you thought would keep you sane. Catastrophic anticipation. Catastrophic anticipation is the relentless, obsessive conviction that something awful is about to happen. Not might happen, will happen. It's a psychological chokehold where every thought, every decision, every silence becomes a potential prelude to disaster. It doesn't matter if everything seems fine on the outside. Your mind whispers that the worst is coming, that the calm is just a setup, that danger is behind the next corner, that joy is bait for suffering. It's not just worrying, it's certainty. The phone rings. Someone has died. A loved one is 5 minutes late. They've been in a crash. A harmless ache in your chest? It's a tumor. Every outcome you imagine ends in loss, betrayal, ruin, death. The brain begins to practice pain before it happens, rehearsing grief for tragedies that haven't occurred, reliving them as if they already have. You feel heartbreak for losses that may never come. And that grief, completely fabricated, hurts just the same. People with catastrophic anticipation often live in a permanent state of emotional bracing, like flinching from a blow that never arrives. They can't relax, can't trust good moments, can't feel peace because peace feels like a setup. The better things are, the worse they believe the collapse will be. They scan every situation for cracks, every facial expression for hidden meaning, every silence for rejection. They're not pessimists, they're survivors in a world their mind has turned into a minefield. This condition can stem from trauma, chronic anxiety, or environments where the worst really did happen without warning. The brain, trying to protect itself, rewires to expect danger at all times. Because if you expect the worst, it won't hurt as much when it comes, right? But it does hurt. It hurts always. Because catastrophic anticipation doesn't just steal your ability to feel safe. It steals your ability to feel present, to enjoy love without mourning it, to succeed without fearing collapse. to be alive without constantly preparing for death. Catastrophic anticipation is not just fear of bad things happening. It's living as if they already have, constantly grieving the imagined future, drowning in what-ifs, while the real, living moment slips silently through your fingers. Truman Show. Delusion. Truman Show delusion is a deeply paranoid and isolating belief that your life is being staged, recorded, and broadcast. Without your consent, without your knowledge, and with everyone around you in on it. Named after the 1998 film The Truman Show, where the main character lives in a fabricated reality television set without knowing it, this delusion transforms everyday life into a meticulously constructed performance. Every person becomes an actor. Every coincidence becomes a clue. Every silence feels scripted. You're not just being watched, you're being studied. At first, it might start with a lingering sense that things are too perfect or too coordinated, that people glance at you too often, that conversations go quiet when you enter a room, that events line up in a way that feels unnatural. You might begin to suspect the news is coded or that strangers are wearing earpieces. Even familiar faces, family, friends, lovers, start to feel like performers following a script. You try to catch them breaking character. You try to test reality, to find the hidden camera, to make it all slip. But it never does. And that's what makes the delusion tighten its grip. The panic comes not just from being watched, but from the belief that your life is not your own. You may feel like your thoughts are being shaped by producers behind the scenes, that your actions are being edited in real time, that your emotions, your suffering, your joy, all of it is entertainment for an invisible audience. And worst of all, no one will admit it. They smile. They say you're imagining it. But you feel it, every second. This delusion often emerges during psychosis, schizophrenia, or dissociative breaks, especially when the mind is under immense stress or emotional fragmentation. But the experience feels very real to the person trapped inside it. There is no safe space. Not your room, not your phone, not your own mind. Privacy becomes impossible. Authenticity becomes unreachable. Even your own identity begins to feel constructed, like a role you've been cast in but can't escape. Truman Show. Delusion is not a fantasy of importance. It's a nightmare of exposure. It turns life into a stage you never agreed to stand on, surrounded by actors you once called friends, beneath lights you can't see but know are there, watching, always watching. Obsessive philosophical ruminations. Obsessive philosophical ruminations are not deep, curious reflections. They are a form of mental captivity, an unrelenting, circular storm of thought where the mind becomes trapped in trying to answer questions it cannot possibly solve. What is the nature of reality? What is consciousness? Why does anything exist at all? These aren't musings anymore. They are obsessions, sharp-edged, paralyzing, consuming. And no answer is ever enough. It begins with a single question. Innocent, intriguing. But the moment the mind tries to answer it, a black hole opens. Logic collapses. Peace disappears. The question splits into more questions. If I am aware of my awareness, what does that mean? If nothing can be proven, how can I be sure this conversation is real? What if free will is an illusion? You chase clarity like a drowning person reaching for air, but the deeper you go, the darker it gets. This kind of mental torment is often tied to existential OCD, depersonalization, or anxiety disorders. But in this form, it's uniquely maddening. Because it feels rational. You're not hallucinating. You're not losing touch with reality. You're clinging to it too tightly, squeezing until it breaks. And the worst part? You know there are no answers. You know philosophers have been circling the same questions for centuries. But that doesn't matter. The brain demands closure, demands certainty. And when none comes, it loops. These ruminations aren't gentle. They're exhausting. You may find yourself unable to sleep, unable to hold conversations, unable to engage with life because you're stuck, mentally pacing inside a room with no doors. People around you say, "Just don't think about it." But you can't stop. Because to stop feels like death, like surrender, like walking away from a truth that might mean everything. Eventually, even the questions start to rot. They don't feel profound anymore. They feel like chains. Words like existence, nothingness, infinity become loaded with dread. The very act of thinking becomes unbearable because every thought threatens to trigger another spiral. Obsessive philosophical ruminations are the mind's attempt to conquer the infinite using tools made for the finite. It is the soul trying to grasp the void and realizing, too late, that the void is grasping back. Persecutory delusions. Persecutory delusions are a psychological siege, a mental state in which the world becomes a battlefield, and everyone, strangers, neighbors, even loved ones, is a potential enemy. This isn't ordinary fear. This isn't anxiety. It is a deep, unwavering certainty that you are being watched, followed, manipulated, or targeted. It doesn't feel like a suspicion. It feels like a fact, etched into the bones of your reality, growing stronger every time you open a door or hear a voice down the hall. At first, it may start small. A car parked outside too long. A coworker whispering. A glance that lasts a second too long. Your brain begins to draw lines between these moments, weaving them into a story where you are the hunted. You check your phone for bugs. You cover your webcam. You stop talking openly. You begin writing down names, patterns, evidence. Your mind becomes an intelligence agency, and your life becomes a case file. But the deeper this belief roots itself, the more your world shrinks. You may become convinced your food is being poisoned, that your home is being surveilled, that your thoughts are being read or broadcast. You see code in license plates, hidden messages in advertisements, warnings in TV shows. You feel tracked, but no one believes you. And that disbelief is the final betrayal, because it means they're in on it too. Persecutory delusions are a hallmark of schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, or severe paranoid psychosis. But to the sufferer, it's not a disorder. It's survival. Every denial of their fear sounds like deception. Every attempt to help sounds like a trap. And the loneliness becomes unbearable. Not just isolation from others, but a disconnection from reality itself. You're no longer living in the same world as everyone else. You're surviving in a nightmare that never ends. Violence can sometimes erupt, not from hatred, but from desperation. From a mind so sure it's under attack that it strikes first. But more often, the suffering is silent. Sleepless nights, self-imposed exile, a life lived in hiding from enemies that may not exist, but whose threat feels more real than anything else. Persecutory delusions are not about being scared. They are about being certain that danger is near, that betrayal is inevitable, and that trust is a weapon that will be used against you the moment you lower your guard. Paranoia-induced memory. Alteration. Paranoia-induced memory. Alteration is a slow, creeping mental distortion where suspicion seeps into your memories and reshapes them, until the past becomes something dark, twisted, and barely recognizable. It's not that your memories disappear. It's that they change, molded by fear and mistrust, warped by the relentless pressure of what if? What if that smile wasn't real? What if that conversation wasn't honest? What if they lied to me all along? And once that seed of doubt is planted, the mind begins rewriting history, quietly, subtly, and completely. At first, the changes are small. A remembered tone of voice seems colder than before. A moment of affection now feels performative. A joke feels like mockery. But over time, the paranoia wraps around the memory like fog, filling in gaps with fear. Entire relationships are reinterpreted. Kindness becomes manipulation. Innocent glances become coded warnings. Supportive friends start to feel like undercover threats. And the worst part? The altered memory feels more true than the original. The paranoia rewires emotional context, and the brain follows. You start replaying old events over and over, each time more suspicious, more afraid. A memory that once brought peace now tightens your chest. You begin looking for clues in the past, connecting dots that were never there, building conspiracies from silence. The mind becomes a courtroom, and every memory is a witness put on trial. But in this courtroom, there's only one outcome: guilt, deception, danger. This condition often emerges in those with paranoid schizophrenia, delusional disorder, PTSD, or severe anxiety. But even outside clinical diagnoses, it can grip anyone under enough stress and mistrust. And once the paranoia infects your memories, your entire foundation begins to rot. Because if the past is a lie, what part of you is still real? The damage spreads into the present. You question everything. Did I ever truly love them? Did they ever love me? Was I blind, or were they hiding something the whole time? You lose faith not only in others, but in yourself, as the narrator of your own life. Because if your mind can rewrite what was, how can you ever trust what is? Paranoia-induced memory. Alteration isn't just fear of the future, it's the invasion of the past. A haunting erosion of truth that turns your own history into a weapon, aimed at you from behind.